thought your position was kind of fair, where you're saying, well, I'm not taking a position one way or the other as to whether or not Israel has committed war crimes. I'm just saying there hasn't been sufficient evidence, and so I'm going to allow you to present the evidence, and I'm just going to argue against it. And I think Alex's position was, well, he thinks your position is actually, you're saying there isn't sufficient evidence and that there are not war crimes, and therefore you should actually hold that position and argue it here. But you kept saying, that's not my position. Because it wasn't my position.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So that's what I'm saying, is that I think, like, that's my issue, is that if it is his position that it is not an insurrection, he should argue that.
No, wait, stop. This is not comparable to the argument that I had.
One, I get that you're saying that you're...
Stop. When you say my definitions have to be consistent, my definition only has to apply in federal jurisdiction, because we're arguing about January 6th. That's it.
That was not the prompt of the debate. It is your personal definition. You chose to use federal precedent.
The question was January 6th an insurrection? Okay?
Yes.
The assumed venue, jurisdiction, territory that it would be applying to is the United States federal government.
What you use to define a military, a military is going to be the same for a state and for the federal government, unless it appeals to some sort of like federal law or state law.
You're a idiot, Tom. That has no. You don't assume.
If you couldn't explain at any point and engage with anything I'm saying, I would believe you. But Andrew,
insurrection, or are we just fighting over a definition right now?
I don't know. It's the problem is somehow Andrew has tricked people, and for some reason Tom thinks it's like a valid argument that if you like. When you
I
have
am not
a debate
justifying Andrew's argument for the 1000th time. I am not justifying his argument nor his debate. So I just want to get that clear.
The fact that you think that you're asking valid questions by saying,
as long as it fits my definition, yes, I'm still going to say they shot them. That's literally what I'm doing. I am challenging.
That's not what happened in the conversation.
I agree. I'm not justifying Andrew.
So
I don't know how many
argument?
times I have to say this. I'm making my argument. I'm not Andrew.
What's your argument?
I need to avoid your example with that.
I'm sorry. I got triggered at this topic.
good luck. Okay, I'm here. What's up?
All right. I went and checked like a bunch of that. I know a bunch of people have been jumping on all day, so I made sure I watched all of those so that I'm not talking to you about the same shit over and over.
Okay.
So I wanted to know, because there seemed to be confusion. It seems as though, from my position and based on what you said, that it seemed like Andrew was kind of in bad faith with the way that he was taking a neutral position on this. Now, I don't want to say bad faith. I would rather say, I think that his audience would expect him to take the position that it was not an insurrection, because that's what he believes. If he's going to be like a thought leader for that group, I think they would expect him to take that position. So I think it's I don't believe
I would say he wasn't taking a neutral position. He was taking like an agnostic position. He was taking some position that like it was impossible to know the definition of insurrection was the position that he was taking. But
do you say impossible? Do you think he was saying it was impossible?
Yes, that's the position that he represented. To be neutral on a particular thing means that you've either not seen evidence at all to convince you one way or another, or it means that you have you've seen evidence, but you've seen like competing evidence on both sides. It doesn't mean that you don't know the definition of a word. That's why I said, like, if I were to ask you if January 6th was a, would you say that you're neutral on that? He wouldn't. He would say that it's a nonsense question. So for him to say that he's neutral on whether or not January 6th was an insurrection or not, but then to not even give a definition of insurrection shows that he's not neutral on it. He just hasn't considered the question. So it's disingenuous and bad faith to assume, or for him to say that he has a neutral stance on it, because he can't even define the prompt.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, I don't think he had a neutral position. I think he's taking a positive versus negative argument stance, where he's just saying, okay, you have the stance that something is true. I'm not saying that it's not true, but I am going to argue against yours, and I am going to
Sure, but he didn't argue against my position either. He just argued the definition of a particular word, and he didn't like my definition, but he didn't offer an alternative definition, and he didn't provide a satisfactory reason why my definition was insufficient.
Well, so I do think when it came to, there was one part, there were a couple of parts actually. So let's, let me start with did you know what the prompt was going into it? Like, was he correct?
Was January 6th an insurrection?
Okay, so was it an insurrection? Okay, so yeah, I think with that, you are taking the position that it is an insurrection, and then he's technically just arguing against it, whereas because it was stated differently a couple of times while you guys were arguing over this. One time you said is it an insurrection or not, or something like that, whereas like he would, in that case, we would expect him to have 100% expect him to have the position that it is not.
No, I don't agree. I disagree. If somebody's asking you, did somebody like is a particular thing a particular thing? I think that you would expect there to be like arguments on both sides of that, not a neutral argument and then a positive argument. That should be made clear ahead of time if that's the case. Because I probably wouldn't have agreed to this unless maybe if we'd phrased it honestly like that and he said, well, I'm not going to come with a definition, I'm just going to poker prod yours, then I might say like, okay, fine, we can do it. But this was a bait and switch, I think.
I agree. Yes, and so that's what I said. It's kind of like the norms within the space is that both people are going to take a positive position. One person's going to say yes, the other person's going to say no. So if you say like, if the prompt is like, is the sky blue? You're not. If you go in saying yes, it's blue, I'm going to have to come in saying no, it is not blue. If I come in and I just argue against your position, it puts you in the hot seat and gives me a massive advantage. But I do think somebody brought this up earlier, and I moderated this debate for you and Alex, and I thought your position was kind of fair, where you're saying, well, I'm not taking a position one way or the other as to whether or not Israel has committed war crimes. I'm just saying there hasn't been sufficient evidence, and so I'm going to allow you to present the evidence, and I'm just going to argue against it. And I think Alex's position was, well, he thinks your position is actually, you're saying there isn't sufficient evidence and that there are not war crimes, and therefore you should actually hold that position and argue it here. But you kept saying that's not my position. Because
it wasn't my position. That's right. Yeah. Right.
So that's what I'm saying is that I think like that's my issue is that if it is his position that it is not an insurrection, he should argue that.
No, wait, stop. This is not comparable to the argument that I had with it's not comparable to the argument that I had with Andrew. If Andrew had a definition of insurrection and I gave a definition of insurrection and then I gave evidence for that insurrection and Andrew said, I don't think you've given enough evidence to satisfy your definition of insurrection, that's what would make it comparable. What happened was Alex had a debate with me and he was saying that Israel had engaged in war crimes. And then I said, okay, well, let's go over your evidence. And I don't believe that he provided me satisfactory evidence that the war crimes that he said happened existed. For it to be comparable to my debate with Andrew, I would have had to have argued with Alex for 3 hours over the definition of a war crime. We didn't get into my argument with Alex was substantive. That's why we weren't just arguing over the definition of a thing. We were going through videos, we were going through news articles, and we were going through evidence to felt if he had built a case towards whether or not Israel had committed war crimes. Personally, I took the stance that I don't think there was enough evidence that they had, but I wasn't going to go as far as to say that they hadn't. For Andrew's position to be similar to mine, what Andrew would have to say is, okay, I understand that this is how insurrection is defined, but I don't believe there's been enough evidence to show that an insurrection has taken place. But that's not his position. His position is, I can't even define insurrection, and I'm only going to be ultimately skeptical of your definition of insurrection and never engage in the definition myself.
Yeah, okay, so I'll agree with you mainly because even before you gave a definition, he had already stated that your definition was too broad, and then that was his position throughout, is that your position was going to be too broad when he hadn't even heard your definition yet. So, it doesn't make sense that he already had a position on your definition being too broad when you hadn't given it yet. Is there a reason why, because obviously he kept like going back to the fact that nobody's actually been charged with an insurrection. Is there a reason why you wanted to do insurrection and not sedition?
Yes, because I believe that insurrection has been the definition historically and legally given for insurrection was easily met by the events that happened. This weird claim over and over again of nobody was charged with insurrection. You don't need to be charged. A particular person doesn't need to be charged with a crime for an event having taken place. Events aren't defined that way. Criminal law doesn't work that way. And writing about history doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah, of course. I'm asking, there's people seem to use them interchangeably, and I read some on the differences between the two. Do you think that there is like a substantive difference between the two that made you really feel like insurrection is like the important one to argue? I agree that like,
yeah, because
obviously,
insurrection
yes,
involves an element of violence, and insurrection involves violence, and there was very clearly like a huge degree of violence on the day of January 6th.
Okay, yeah, I guess sedition is generally just going to be the plotting for some sort of overtake, and then the insurrection is going to be the action of actually trying to take over. Okay.
Maybe. I don't know if I don't know if they were going to. I don't know if the goal was to take over the government. That would be more like a coup or maybe an insurrection that leads into a full-scale rebellion. I think that they were there because they wanted to resist the counting of the electoral votes. They didn't want the electoral votes to be counted. Congress was counting them on the 6th. Donald Trump was telling them that they needed to pressure them not to count the electoral vote, and that President or Vice President Pence needed to stop the counting of the electoral vote. So that's the federal law that they were there to resist the enactment of, and to resist the procedure of carrying out.
Yeah, sorry. When I say take over, I don't mean like actually taking over the entire government. I mean like taking over enough to impede government processes. Okay. And so when there was one example that he gave that while I was reviewing the debate on my channel, I actually thought that this was a fairly good challenge, but when you gave your rebuttal, you totally changed his hypothetical. And so I wanted to know, did you know that when he gave the abortion clinic example, that you drastically changed it once you engaged with it?
No, I don't remember.
Okay, so his initial example was if there were people rioting at an abortion clinic because they want abortion to be overturned, and like we just assume that there's a federal law that was passed and they're, I don't know, like holding people hostage at an abortion clinic or whatever, would you consider that an insurrection? Because it would seem to meet almost all of your criteria.
So the issue was, so assuming that there's like a federal thing here, I'm pretty sure that the part where you, let me see if I can find this doc. I think that the part where you're like resisting the execution or carrying out of like a particular law, I don't think it has to be against like a federal entity, or it has to be against like a state entity or whatever that's like enacting or doing that particular law. Like for the Whiskey Rebellion, they were literally fighting against like the tax collectors that were coming to collect the tax. If you like authorize somebody to do something legally and then you go and like insurrect or you go and riot against those people that are doing the thing, but they're not like members of government or something, I don't know if it counts as an insurrection at that point. I don't think it does.
Yeah, but the part where it's actually like interfering with government laws, where you're like doing this for the purpose of interfering with the government law, and over when he would keep giving like, oh, well, rioting is the same thing, you would say, well, it's the purpose of what it is that you're doing. It's for the goal. And if the goal is now to interfere with some sort of law, then that's what the difference is. So when he gave the abortion clinic example, that seemed to now include the aspect of interfering with a governmental law. But it doesn't actually, like when we think of this in a
See, so like I'm looking at I've got a quote from Judge Curtis and Judge Field and William. Okay, so I'm reading from this paper. And in a quote, an insurrection against the United States required resistance to any statute or some public law of the United States, end quote. Curtis reminded a grand jury, quote, the law does not distinguish between a purpose to prevent the execution of one or several or all laws, end quote. An insurrection could be directed at a legislature as well as at executive officials. William Rawle declared an effort to, quote, coerce repeal of a general law, end quote, to be, quote, an overt act of levying war, end quote. Justice Field's opinion in Greathouse held that any effort to, quote, coerce the conduct, end quote, of government constituted an insurrection. So I don't know if you can like lead a riot against like private people who are carrying out a thing that is like being lawfully done. I don't know if you could consider that an insurrection.
Well, I mean, based on what he just said, if you're coercing the conduct directed at a legislator or officials, that
but it's not directed at, it's the violence is directed at private citizens that are doing it there, right?
Well, okay, I suppose, I mean, they're holding these people hostage and the ransom is on the government. It's on the officials now. And so technically, yes, it's directly on these people, but it is indirectly on the legislator and the officials to actually do something to to fix this, and in order to amend it, they would have to change
I don't know
the law.
if making them pay the ransom counts as doing the action to them. But I mean, like, I don't think I would agree with that. But even if I were to, even if I were to grant all of that, all I'm going to say is then fine, I guess we could count that as an insurrection, I guess.
Yeah, so that's more so what I'm wondering is that, like, because within your definition, it seems to meet the requirements. Once you responded, you changed it to like this pretty similar thing, but it was now at a federal building, and all of the like actions were being taken at this federal building. And I think
because I think that generally when you talk about insurrecting, it's usually an action against like the government or like part of the government or like the body of the government. Or some like representative of the government, like an executor of law. It's like a police officer or some public official charged with implementing the law, or like a legislature to influence like the overture of a law. So like a tax collector or like a congressman or something.
Right.
Like,
so
like nobody in an abortion clinic is passing any laws or is like the executor of a law. They're just doing things that are lawful, right?
Right. So this is like where I struggled with it. It's like conceptually, when I think of an insurrection, I feel like, yes, like a government building or like a military or police or something like that being involved in some way. And then now legislatures and laws and things like that, those are going to like build on top of this conceptually. But when I think of it, even if we change the person at the abortion clinic, there's a girl there to get an abortion, and she's like a justice's daughter, and now they're holding a justice's daughter captive. It still seems like it's now more directly engaging with an official, yet it still does not feel like an insurrection. And then I would say, even if we change the daughter to the actual justice themselves being held captive.
Hold on, just real quick. What are we even arguing in further of here?
So I'm trying to understand like more so the way that you're defining it and the way that you're thinking of it. So not to challenge whether or not you're right in that
how would any of this even remotely apply to anything even remotely similar to January 6th?
Not necessarily. Okay, it's about whether or not your definition, whether or not you have like an understanding of your definition, and me wanting to know that understanding. Because like I said,
reject out of hand any type of nibbling around the edge to find the most far out possible way that insurrection might not apply to the most hyper-specific example in the world. I reject out of hand even entertaining these arguments unless somebody wants to give me a different definition. Like if it's going to be, what if there is a doctor, not the attorney general, the solicitor, what's the name of the head doctor in the United States? Fuck, there's a name for this guy. But like, what if that was the doctor performing the abortion, but it was in Puerto Rico, or no, but it was in Okinawa, Japan, but it was on a U.S. military base, and there were only two people insurrecting, but one was a half Japanese citizen and half U.S. citizen, but the violence that they were doing was harikari and seppuku, which isn't violence in an American sense, but it's like, I reject. Out of hand, I reject any type of weird nibble around the edges. Whatever we're talking about for J6 is way, way, way over this like insanely weird nibble at the edge. The only way that I would entertain an argument like this is if somebody even had a remotely competent or coherent definition of insurrection that they wanted to suggest instead. Or is your position that there is no such thing as insurrection, and whenever anybody historically wrote about the term insurrection, they were just writing nonsense?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I 100% think that the January 6th is an insurrection, but I don't know that I personally can come up with a definition that is going to be consistent enough to where and I don't think your definition is like poor or inconsistent, but it is more so that so the conversation again is like that with my audience is that we were thinking like, okay, conceptually, when we think of an insurrection, lots of times when we challenge these definitions, we're not really going to feel like that fits a definition. And I think a lot of the time with Andrew, when he's talking about like pot smoking hippies and shit like that, like he's trying to like make it these people that seem really harmless and unviolent, and they're very peaceful. And now you just don't want to call it an insurrection because they don't seem all that bad.
But he's fallaciously, like that's why I jokingly said, what is the name of the fallacious appeal to most people don't feel like a thing? Like that's not a real argument. That's not an argument made in good faith, right? What if a grandma wanders into a store and, she'd been told by her children that it's actually okay to walk out of the store with a PS4, and she does it, like, well, does that actually count as stealing? Does she really feel like a thief to you? Like, these aren't real arguments, you know? If you were to construct it in such a way that, like, a bunch of pot-smoking hippies get together, you know, with the idea of contravening the implementation of some kind of law, but it gets violent or whatever, like, you can construct it in the most wacky way that you want, but all you're doing is you're hardcore nibbling around the edges of, like, what it is to be an insurrection in. Like, that's just stupid. Like, let's say, for instance, here's a question for you. Let's say that there are 1,000 people that are protesting in a street. Let's say that 2 people go start throwing bricks through windows who are part of this crowd. Would you call that a riot?
I don't know.
And then regardless of what you say to that, I'm going to say, well, what about 3 people? What about 4 people? What about 5 people? Like, at some point, you're going to have to concede, okay, well, if 500 people are doing it, yes. But if you can't give me the exact amount, does that mean that riots don't exist? Or that you can't have a riot because I can't give you the exact number of people that would have to be violent in a particular protest for it to be called a riot? That's a nonsense argument. It's not even made in good faith. So there's not even remotely an approach to good faith in that argument to nibble around the edges like that.
Okay. So while I agree that, yes, like, again, we're able to look at these things, the reason I'll mostly agree is because you're looking at historical precedent and you're using definitions that were used historically to come to a definition based on, like, you know, federal law and the ways that these things were implemented. But also, in general, normally when we use language, we're going to have to use a word that everybody else would look at that word and say, yes, that's what I think of when I use this word as well, or that's something that would fit my conceptualization of this word. And the only reason that I'm asking is, 1, yes, like, I agree that fits the definition, but 2, I also know that there's a lot of, like, gray areas around the edges, and I am trying to understand.
I don't agree.
If you
I don't think there's any disagreement whatsoever about what an insurrection is or what an insurrection means. The only disagreement here comes from the fact that people don't like the application in this particular circumstance. For instance, we can argue all day. I think that 99% of people would agree on what murder is, right? But that doesn't mean that everybody agrees that every single killing is a murder. In fact, there are some that are highly contentious. Look at Chauvin and George Floyd, right? Like, half the country looked at that and said murder, and the other half looked at it and said manslaughter, right? We all agree that murder is a real thing, right? But that doesn't mean that we can all agree on when a thing is murder. So no, right. I reject this idea that just because people disagree on if J6 was an insurrection or not, that what an insurrection is magically unknowable and people don't have feelings about that. If you were to describe J6 in any other word, people would very easily say it's an insurrection. They just don't like the application of this particular circumstance.
Okay, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm not being clear. I, again, 100% think that January 6th was an insurrection, and I don't think there's any doubt.
I'm not challenging whether you think it's an insurrection. I'm just saying that I disagree with your assertion that you're being very clear. I can restate your position before I answer if you feel like I'm not understanding your position. It sounded like your position was, in common parlance, we have words, and sometimes we might disagree on what these words mean, right? Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
Okay, and so if we're going to make an assertion that X is A, we should all have a pretty good understanding of what A is, and if we all disagree about what A is, then we can't really say that X is A. That's not fair. Where X is January 6th and A isn't. Okay, sorry. So I'm not necessarily challenging that you are wrong on this position or that we cannot know this thing. I am asking more so, do you feel like you know where these lines are drawn? And I'm wanting to kind of understand it. This is, I guess, maybe it's possible this just isn't an interesting conversation to you, but more so with my community is what we started getting into is, like, yes, where we draw the lines and what it is that we actually conceptualize. The reason why this is not an interesting conversation to me, and I don't believe anybody in your community is doing this, and if they want to come on and chat, they can. Nobody asks this question in good faith. This is not true, okay? When Loki wagers his head to a bunch of dwarves and then he loses while gambling, and then they go to cut his head off, and they're trying to figure out where exactly his head begins and his neck ends, and they can't figure it out, and Loki says, oh, well, guess you can't cut any part because I didn't wager any part of my neck. That's not Loki acting in good faith. It's him tricking the dwarves so that he doesn't lose his head after a night out gambling, okay? This challenge to J6 being an insurrection by not having the exact, precise definition of what an insurrection is, you would never, ever, ever ask for this standard of evidence in any other definition of any other event ever. There is not a single person that can give me the exact definition of a riot. When does a protest become a riot? When does a collection of people who are unhappy become a protest? When does when does a sexual assault become a rape, or when does second degree murder become first degree murder, or when do, like, there's things that are legally defined that are up to juries to decide. There are things that are a little bit ambiguous around the edges. Yeah, the idea that like you have to have some rock ultra fucking solid definition of a thing that survives to extreme scrutiny at every single like extreme example of a given thing, that is a standard that isn't applied to any definition of any term ever at any point in time. So unless you want to say I can actually give you the precise definition of a riot, then I will never say that I need to give you the exact precise around the definition, or around the edges definition of an insurrection.
Yeah, again, I'm not challenging your definition, and I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm asking, I was asking, yes, where you actually think the lines are drawn and what it is that you think would or wouldn't qualify as an insurrection.
But
that is not,
though.
yes, but that is not to extend to say, well, now what it is that you're saying about January 6th isn't an insurrection. I'm more so asking about different aspects of what it is that you're giving, and then trying to understand where you would draw those lines, literally just for the sake of understanding the word of insurrection. And especially with all of the research that you've done on this, I think that you would be the person's brain to pick on this, because I am asking the question in good faith, and I do think it's an interesting question. But yeah, like, it's not to destroy anything about January 6th.
Sure. So so you can try one more time, and I'll tell you how I evaluate it. Okay, ask me a question.
Okay, so
for what is an insurrection, and I'll run through each of these points, and I'll try to, like, in my mind, I'll try to make sense of it for how I would evaluate. Go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things that Andrew brought up a couple of times is like state examples. Do you think that states could actually apply as insurrections?
I don't see why you wouldn't be able to, but I don't have historical examples of that. So now I'm going to go on like the definition that I have here that's constructed, but my understanding is like all of the historical aspects and elements that were used to build this understanding of what an insurrection is are elements that come from federal law or insurrections against the United States of America. Much the same that if we were to talk about treason, I'm not familiar with treason being any state crime. I don't know if you can commit treason against the state of Arkansas, but maybe you can. But I don't see why I couldn't apply this insurrection definition to a state if you wanted to. So we can do that, sure.
Okay. So you don't think states are out of bounds? So when we go back, I guess, then to the example that Andrew gave, where
wait, you give me a clear example and I'll go through it. Don't reference Andrew's. Give me a clear example and I'll ask and I'll tell you how I would run through this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say there are a bunch of random people being held hostage, and I'll change this in just a second, but there's a bunch of people randomly being held hostage at their homes, and they're being held hostage in order for Congress to not verify the votes on January 6th. Is this still considered an insurrection?
Okay, random people are being held hostage by whom?
A militia.
Random people held hostage by a militia to get Congress to not certify the vote.
Mm-hmm.
That's our question?
Yes.
Okay, so we have an assemblage of people. I guess. Maybe one of the first factor is met. 2 is resisting any law or interfering with the course of government proceeding. Okay, so we're resisting the certification of the vote. I think element 2 is probably met. And then by force or intimidation. I don't know if it counts as force or intimidation by proxy. I don't think so. And then for public purposes, so element 1 might be met. I don't think element 3 is met. I don't know if that force or intimidation can be by proxy. So, like, let's say that the president was going to sign into some law, and like 100 people decided to take hostage like 10 civilians in California, and they were like, we're going to kill this person if the president signs this into law. Like, does that count as an insurrection?
Yeah, so it's indirect now, because it's not actually, the force and intimidation are not actually being placed on anybody in government or a government building in and of itself. It's being placed on somebody else, and so therefore that kind of changes it.
Maybe I would like hesitantly say yes to this because you're doing through intimidation. I guess maybe I could maybe say yes to this. Sure.
Okay. So the next question that I was going to ask is if we changed it to like actual like Congress, like they did the same thing, but they kidnapped all of Congress at their homes, not at the actual building, but at their homes. That would definitely meet that third
Absolutely,
part.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Because yeah, one of the issues I think that I have is that I think that like we would almost definitely I feel like it would almost always have to be through some sort of government building. But I don't know if that's actually correct. And it all just in my head that feels right or feels more like an insurrection within like, yes, a conceptualization of what it is that I would actually immediately call an insurrection. I see something on the news. I hear them say, you know, this thing happened. I'm wanting to know, well, what do I actually apply the word insurrection to automatically? And I think that, yes, like a government buildings almost make it like an automatic thing for me, but
not necessarily
being outside.
If you're attacking a government building, like you might not be trying to like stop like a particular thing happening. Like for instance, if this exact same thing happened on January 7th or January 5th, I might not consider it an insurrection. Because now I'm not sure if you are resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. You're there protesting, and even if you riot and they blew up all of Congress, I guess, or maybe they did it with the express purpose of stopping the proceeding tomorrow, I think that would make it different. The fact that it was on January 6th, I think, is very important. It gives it far more intentionality for what they're trying to obstruct there, which was the counting of the electoral votes.
Well, yeah, that was actually my very next question is like, yes, so they like same exact thing or not same exact thing. A bunch of people, same people, they go in at night and they like, yes, they set up a bunch of things like, I don't know, like things that are going to go off like gas in the air conditioning units that are going to make everybody run out of the building. But they did it all the night before.
Sure, but if it was the goal with obstructing what was happening on the 6th, then maybe you still would say sure. But if it was like the exact same thing that played out last time, but it happened on January 5th, I don't know if you call it an insurrection at that point. But if you're trying to like rig the building or, you know, tamper with the building in some way that would cause to interfere with the passage of the law or the counting of the votes, then it would count.
Okay. Because yeah, okay. So that makes sense. I get all of that now. Okay. So with the debate, when you didn't want to engage with the state hypotheticals, was that because you felt like it had to apply to federal in order for it to be the same, or did you feel like it was going to fall outside of your definition, or what was the reason for kind of like avoiding the state hypotheticals in the middle of the debate?
Because when I wrote down my strategy going into this debate, I recognized that it was unlikely that he would be able to actually engage with the substance of the debate, and there were only 4 possible ways for him to try to eke out a successful conversation, and he would either have to, 1, appeal to a personal definition of insurrection, in which case my counter would have been, your personal definition is irrelevant. What matters is the historical and legal definition used, especially in the drafting of the 14th Amendment. The second way he could have gotten out was by claiming that BLM/protest or whatever the fuck else must have also been an insurrection. He partially tried to do this, but I didn't want to engage on anything related to BLM or any other protests or Chaz or whatever else. If he wants to argue if those are insurrections, that's fine, but he just concede the primary point, and then we can move to the other things to see if those would be insurrections or not. The third way was some people say, well, it was never going to work, so it wasn't an insurrection, in which case I would say they're not defined by success or fail. And then the fourth strategy is, why was no one charged with an insurrection? And the answer to that is because individuals are charged with or not charged with crimes for a variety of reasons. That has absolutely no bearing on whether the event itself would be characterized as an insurrection or riot or whatever. So I guess he technically used 3 out of 4 of these strategies that I said were the only way that somebody really in bad faith could respond. But that's why I didn't want to run down the rabbit hole of being on the defense the whole time, which I guess I ended up being because he didn't even provide a positive argument. So there was no way to... I don't want to sit there and run down the whole of the whataboutisms for the entirety of the debate because it's so tiring and it's so bad faith and it's so boring when conservatives do this to defend J6.
Yeah, I plan on talking to Andrew in a little bit as well, and that's probably, the strategy of not taking a position is probably mostly what I'm going to talk to him about. I think because he didn't take a position, and he said from the beginning, his whole objective is to just show that your definition is too broad. I think that because you didn't actually state that it had to be federal in the initial definition, but then later you stated that it would need to be federal because that's how it's been used historically. I think that to him, that was a narrowing of the definition in the middle of the debate, and that he can now run around and claim victory.
You're completely wrong. I don't know if you're either too dumb to see what he does or if you're doing this in bad faith. Andrew was not doing that in good faith, where he's saying
I agree.
I feel like you've run into too many inconsistencies in your definition, and now I feel that there's some confusion here. If he wanted to, we could have clarified, and he could have granted me for the purpose of a good faith argument, hey, okay, fine, we'll only apply this to federal stuff. But he didn't do that. He wanted to needlessly needle and torture every single element of this definition because he wasn't prepared to do a substantive analysis of the events on January 6th to see if it comported with my definition, and he absolutely wasn't prepared to provide any definition of his own. So we never spoke about if January 6th was an insurrection or not. What we really debated was, does Destiny have a definition of insurrection that satisfies Andrew's personal nebulous ideas of what a particular thing is? At no point was Andrew confused about what I was saying, and at no point did Andrew feel like I changed something too much to understand. He was only doing this to torture the definition such that he didn't have to engage substantively with any point relating to J6. That's what was happening, to be ultra clear.
Yes, again, that's what I'm saying, is that's the point. That's the reason I'm going to end up talking to him about this the entire time, is because I think that was his strategy, and that just by you adding a part in there, that's why he thinks he can claim victory now, is because you added something, and therefore now the definition narrowed, and that proved to him and his audience that you had narrowed the definition somehow, and that seems
he can say that, but
that
also
was his whole strategy from the beginning.
That's fine, but it's also part of this is also just, unfortunately, he doesn't have an understanding of law or jurisdiction as well, right? He didn't seem to think there was a big deal between the difference in state or federal stuff. I didn't call him out on this, but in the beginning, for instance, he said that Trump was acquitted of insurrection. That's absolutely not true. That's not even remotely true in any sense of the word. And then also he also claimed that he was asking me questions about, like, are you sure that DC doesn't exist in a state or isn't a state? And then he seemed also to not know that Donald Trump was indeed the head of the National Guard for DC, because DC is a federal entity and that goes through the federal National Guard, not a state national. He didn't seem to know any of these things as well. So there was no, I came with historical examples. I've come with at least 2 papers that I've read on scholars that write on this subject. He tried to write these off as internet people, I guess, for some reason. These are esteemed legal scholars. There's a reason why this case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. If he wanted to, at the very least, he could have at least cited the writings of the Supreme Court back at me, but he wasn't even familiar with the Supreme Court ruling, then ended up tossing this out, because he seemed to think that ruling had to do with them defining insurrection or something, which it didn't. It didn't deal with that at all. He was just utterly lost on every part of this, and he tried to wash his way through the debate by just being a little philosophy debate bro, but that was it. There was no good faith or anything applied to any part of this conversation.
Yeah, I guess for me, everybody keeps comparing him and Rob North, but they're so insanely different, because he will come in with, Andrew will come in with very little information and then just challenge yours and nitpick at it over and over until he feels like he's challenged it enough until it's a victory. Whereas Rob will come in with so much information that it's actually hard to even keep up with what his position is, and he has almost too much research and too much information, where he'll bring up stuff that you've never even heard of, or you don't even know if it's real.
Yeah, they approach things in different ways. Yeah.
Yes, insanely.
Oh, and then also too, we were talking about January 6th, which was an insurrection on the federal government. I shouldn't need to expand or narrow or whatever, talk about if my definition would apply to state governments. If we were having a debate on whether or not somebody engaged in first-degree murder or second-degree murder in the state of Nebraska, I shouldn't have to explain whether or not that second-degree murder charge is written the same or differently in, the state of Florida or some other place. That I shouldn't have to do that. We were talking about was January 6th an insurrection? My definition of insurrection need only apply to federal land. We only have to talk about an insurrection against the U.S. government. Appealing to some state definition, it has nothing to do with what's going on. None of this has to do with the state. So it was all of these were red herrings and deflections.
In general, in this specific scenario, I might agree, but I do think in general, somebody challenging the consistency of your definition is important, especially if you're arguing over the definition. He wasn't arguing over the definition, so it doesn't matter. But in general, I would say that, yes, somebody challenging the consistency of your position is important, and that unless your definition is hyper-focused where it only fits federal.
If my grandma had wheels instead of legs, she would be a bicycle.
That's not.
I don't know what the point is of what you're saying. I don't know why you're saying but in general, we're not talking about in general. We had a particular debate on whether or not January 6th was an insurrection. What is this? Well, if we were talking about something else, we would. Who cares? We're not talking about anything else. If somebody wants to have if somebody wants to have a conversation about can insurrections happen in states?
I don't mean for this topic.
But that's a totally separate, not related to anything we're talking about now.
I don't mean for this topic. No, I think on this topic, he ought to challenge the consistency of your definition unless your definition does not fit states in it, unless your definition only applies to federal things, then it makes sense that he would use a state challenge and say, this could challenge the consistency of your definition. Your definition does allow for states to state insurrections to apply, so there's no reason why you wouldn't.
But even if it did, who cares?
Argument.
So what? Maybe I would say a whole bunch of things are insurrections then.
Right, but if that's not, it doesn't matter if you would, it matters if you wouldn't. If you say, okay, this fits my definition, but I wouldn't actually call that an insurrection.
No, hold on. Then I would just
challenge
be a hypocrite.
The consistency. Yes, that's the point. No. That's what I'm saying. That's why it matters that you would engage with it.
But me being a hypocrite doesn't influence whether or not I think January 6th is an insurrection.
It matters as to whether or not what you're using as your definition actually fits and whether or not your definition makes sense. It does. Your definition ought to be consistent and you ought to hold that consistently.
Hold on. First of all, no, hold on. You understand that second-degree murder is defined differently across every single state in the United States, right? That there are different charges for similar types of crimes, or that they're written differently. There is absolutely no rule saying that the U.S. federal law, and not to mention the fact that that's not even true. That if you can go and find insurrection Florida, and you can look up crimes for insurrection in Florida, and the way that these are written in state statutes are not the same as it's written for a federal statute. Definitionally so. So no, the idea that.
Okay, if you're saying federal law versus state law, then I agree. But I'm saying based on your definition, what definition you're using, you didn't say this is how the state or this is how the federal government currently defines insurrection. You said this is my definition because this is how I see it's historically been used. And so now
in federal cases, yes.
Yes, in federal cases, but you're not saying that this is like federal law now. If you are saying yes, this is federal law, and I'm only talking about federal law,
I'm just saying,
of course it's going to be different in different states. I agree with that, but I'm saying if it's your personal definition, yes, you have to hold it consistently for states.
It's not my personal definition. It's the one that I'm using, and in order to establish the definition that I'm using, I'm leaning on historical and judicial precedent for it. All the historical and judicial precedent that I'm leaning on talks about insurrection and a federal sense. So I don't know if that particular definition, I don't know if that would extend to states or not. I have no idea, but it's not relevant to the debate. You don't have to ask me in all possible worlds or in every possible reality or in Harry Potter if an insurrection started at Hogwarts and carried over into the Muggles world, would it still? I don't have to answer all of those questions. That's absurd, especially against an opponent that hasn't given a definition that's superior to mine. The only way that in your world, the only way, in my opinion, as a good faith debater, that appeals to hypocrisy work are if you can give a more workable definition. So if somebody were to say, Destiny, I actually don't like your definition of insurrection because I would define it this way because yours has all these problems and mine has none of these problems, then I would be forced to contend with, okay, well, fuck, that definition might be superior and maybe I would have to challenge mine. But you can't just endlessly nitpick and needle mine and then pretend that you've made some sort of argument that because, that's just not the case.
So you don't think your definition has to be consistent because I get that you're saying that you're...
Stop. When you say my definitions have to be consistent, my definition only has to apply in federal jurisdiction because we're arguing about January 6th. That's it.
Wait, but that doesn't... It's your... Hold on. The prompt of the debate was not, is this federally, in federal law, considered an insurrection? Or is this enough for them to be charged with insurrection according to federal law? That was not the prompt of the debate. It is your personal definition. You chose to use federal, federal precedent.
The question was January 6th an insurrection? Okay? Yes. The assumed venue, jurisdiction, territory that it would be applying to is the United States federal government.
If we're talking about federal law,
it's U.S. federal land. No, for everything. It's the United States. It's federal territory. We're not talking about a state. If it was a state, then we would maybe be considering it in different ways. But I've never heard insurrection or treason or anything to refer to like actions that you can take against a state. January 6th was about an insurrection on federal property against the federal government. So it would be assumed by any good faith debater or anybody with a brain that when we're talking about insurrection, clearly we're all talking about against the country of the United States of America, not something that would apply to every state. Because what if I grant you that? What if I say, yeah, true, it is states. And you go, okay, Destiny, well, what about a city? Does insurrection apply to every single city? What about to every single county? Can you insurrect in a neighborhood? Like, I don't fucking know. That's not what we're talking about.
Yes, because you're making it about the law for some reason when the question was not about the law. Is this an insurrection?
I'm not making it about the law. I'm not making it about the law.
What? Okay, you keep saying that this is the thing that separates it is the fact that federal law is going to be very different from state law. You are making it about the law.
I'm not making it about the law. I'm saying that when you insurrect, when you engage in that behavior, it's different when you do it against a federal government versus a state government. You don't have to talk about like a criminal charge there to talk about the differences between insurrecting against a state versus the federal government. We don't have to appeal to a legal statute here. There's just a difference in what you're doing. Do you agree with that or do you disagree with that?
There's a difference in what you're doing, but we wouldn't label it differently. And especially based on your definition would 100% apply to anybody who is committing the same exact acts on a state government or state buildings or state proceedings or any of those things.
Sure. And it's possible that that's true, but that's not part of the debate. And I don't need a consistency check from a retard that's not even going to give a definition on every single level of government. I don't need a consistency check on if you can insurrect against a state, a city, a district, a county. I don't need to check every single one of those. The argument isn't concerning any of that.
I don't think the consistency check is...
I didn't come prepared to debate on insurrection against states. I came prepared to debate on whether January 6th was an insurrection. And the studying that I did there, the historical material there, my understanding is all focused on insurrections on against the United States government. So I'm not even comfortable answering. Like, could the definition apply to a state? Sure, it's possible, but I'm not going to sit there and throw my weight behind that because unlike what you and Andrew are saying, it's not my personal definition. This is the definition that the federal legislatures had in mind at the time that the 14th Amendment was drafted. And that's the historical argument and the judicial precedents that I'm leaning on when I make this argument, because my debate was over whether or not January 6th was an insurrection. Now, the rest of that would be an insurrection against the United States government, not an insurrection against Massachusetts or Pennsylvania or New York State or Virginia or anything else. It was an insurrection against the United States federal government. So I came prepared for an understanding of what an insurrection was against the United States federal government, not one that would apply to every single city, state, district, and whatever on up.
Tom, that last point is the most important.
So, well, hold on. Wait. Just real quick. If you're going into a debate to talk about whether or not Booth shot Lincoln, and you're giving this definition on like, oh, well, he shot him because we know that the bullet came out of the gun and then hit him. And then he says, okay, well, in this other example where Kyle Rittenhouse had a gun, let's say Kyle Rittenhouse had a gun, but he just had a bullet that was just sitting in the barrel and then slung the gun at them. And the bullet now came out and hit the person. And you say, whoa, that was a state charge. Okay. That wasn't against a president. That doesn't count anymore for my definition of shooting because now it wasn't against the same person or the same thing. So it's totally different.
Wait. Hold on. Wait, I can answer. Okay, hold on. When you talk about insurrection, okay, can you acknowledge that an insurrection is a thing that can exist independent of like a legal definition that we can talk, for instance, like a riot, right?
Yes, okay. That is what I'm saying. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. The research that I did about insurrection has to do with engaging in insurrection against a country, not like a subdivision of the country or a state in the country. So I didn't come prepared to talk about whether or not my research about an insurrection against a country would equally and evenly apply throughout against all the states. I don't know if that would be the case. And off the top of my head, I maybe could think of some challenges that, well, now I'm in a really uncomfortable spot because I said, well, yeah, it would apply the exact same to a state. For instance, what if it was the case that Donald Trump or Joe Biden felt like Texas wasn't enforcing their border policy well, and so Biden were to go and send down federal agents to contravene the state of Texas in how they wanted to enforce immigration law, right? You have an assemblage of people all united for a common purpose, using force or intimidation to contravene against like a public interest of defending the border in Texas. Well, now, Destiny, are you saying that the federal government is committing an insurrection in Texas? Well, fuck me, I don't know now, right? And I could probably think of like 2 or 3 more examples. I'm not sure. January 6th, though, was not an insurrection against a state, so I didn't come with a common or legal understanding of an insurrection against any particular delineation or division of territory, but against an entire country. That's what I came for, because that's what this debate was about. And my definition doesn't need to apply all the way down.
What were you going to say, Pisco?
Yeah, so I think it's important. I understand why you're saying what you're saying, because I think that as it will happen, there is a conception of what an insurrection is as against a state government. But what Stephen is saying is true, that he's focusing on historical usage as relates the framing of Section 3. And there could be differences, as he's outlined, between the definition of insurrection as against the state and as against the federal government. As it happens, I don't think there is, save for maybe some exceptions that might be kind of implied by what, the federal government doing something as against the state. But that doesn't really matter, and it's not a big point. You can use your kind of parade of horribles or your kind of hypotheticals as against the federal government. It doesn't change anything. This is not an important point to get hung up on. So it would be so easy for Andrew to say, yeah, okay, let's just talk about federal government then, and we'll do like leftist protest against the federal government. It was not a point to get hung up on at all. And though I probably would agree that the definition of insurrection is largely the same between state and federal government, Stephen is right that he didn't prepare for that discussion. And
also, I just want to be just to be clear, right? So like people have sent me, so like in Florida, there's a statute for like inciting insurrection. I don't know every single law of every single state, so I wouldn't even co-sign that in a debate, because I could be walking into a huge trap where it's like, okay, yeah, I would say it's the same in every single one. And then the next question is, okay, and you're relying on written words from legislators and historical things, and it's like, yeah, I am. And then it'd be like, okay, well, Stephen, in Arkansas, here's the historical writing that they have on insurrection, and it's different from Texas, and that's different from California. And I'd be like, okay, well, fuck me. Now I'm fucked. Now I fucked myself, right? That's why I don't sign. Yeah.
Do you understand that? Because like,
I don't, because wait, just hold on, Tom, both of you just spoke, and I would like to challenge what both of you just said.
Tom, because I don't think you truly understood what he just said. So what he just said was his mode of analysis is kind of a form of originalism. And that means it's not, we don't look to the definition of insurrection right now. You look to the definition of insurrection at the time of the enactment of the relevant provision. And so what he is just telling you, even though I agree at the time insurrection, in the 1860s probably was consistent between state and federal, it could be that there's a relevant provision for insurrection that happened in a different place.
I understand.
Time. If you look at the definitions, and they're not personal definitions, you look to like statements made in the 1860s. There's a reason that the dates are kind of all in the 19th century and kind of around the Civil War, because that's when the provision was enacted, which Stephen is referencing.
I understand, but when I ask him, are you using, is this an argument over whether or not it fits the law, or whether or not they can be charged with it? He says, no, that's not what I'm arguing. Okay, so he's using a colloquial definition. He chose to get his, what?
Wait, you just said a mistake, right? You just said, is it legal, the legal definition, and therefore he can be charged with it. You understand that he is referencing a legal
He's
definition.
Referencing, yes, let me finish what I'm saying. Hold on, stop. Let me finish what I'm saying. So he's saying that it cannot be it is a colloquial definition. He chose to use stop talking, Pisco. He chose to use historical precedent in order to come to his definition, and he's saying this is why I personally call January 6th an insurrection, is because this is what I used to come to that definition. But now he's saying, oh, well, you can't challenge my definition because I chose to use this historical precedent to come to this definition. That's what he said. What do you mean?
Hold on. Wait, real quick. I speak for a second. Okay, hold on. This is the definition that I'm choosing to use. That doesn't make it my personal definition, okay? The definition that I'm using is what insurrection was thought of at the time of the framing of the 14th Amendment. And the reason I know that is because lawmakers would use this term when they would put it in certain statutes or when they would put it in a constitutional amendment, and that gives me a guideline for as to what insurrection meant. I'm not using insurrection as it's defined in a law. I'm just looking at laws because when that law was passed, insurrection would have been used in a way that I could understand what they meant when they used it. That's the definition that I'm using.
Right, I understand, but that's for a debate about whether or not it fits the 15th Amendment. And I was asking, okay, like, yes, is it about
it's not
like
the 15th Amendment? Okay, so stop. Stephen said at the start of the conversation, he gave a rationale, right? He gave a reason why he's citing texts and documents related to the 14th Amendment for his definition of insurrection. He said, the reason I'm using this definition is because the Constitution is the document that binds our society. Do you recall in his opening argument that Stephen made, like the first minute and 2 minutes, unlike Andrew, who used his entire opening to do irrelevant statements about inconsistencies, Stephen grounded it out and why he was picking a definition grounded in the Constitution, because that has some purchase over our society. That's why he's picking the definition.
I agree with all of this, yes.
His picking that definition, one, is not a proprietary definition. Or like a personal definition. What he is purporting, and Andrew can contest this, he didn't, is that this is the standard legal definition according to Section 3, and it makes sense to use it. But that's not a personal definition, and it doesn't require charging or a criminal standard or the fact that their charge is broad. That's just silly. And so there's this conflation constantly between the legal definition, which Stephen is citing, but it doesn't mean that it's coextensive with actions that a government may or may not take.
Yes, I understand. But when I ask why you wouldn't engage with a consistency argument that would apply to a state, he's saying, yes, because my research had to do with federal, and my and the argument overall had to do with federal. But when you go into a debate, you come in with a definition that you're using and the other person is challenging it. And it's on you calling it an insurrection. You're saying this is an insurrection. And if he gives another definition, he may give another definition that is completely different and has nothing to do with federal or state or anything. And he's saying, this is my definition. This is why I don't think it fits. And if he gives that definition,
but in order for this to make sense, then maybe if the debate is a federal insurrection the same as a state insurrection? Or would January 6th have been an insurrection if it was against a state courthouse?
Or if it had anything to do with federal or state at all, but it didn't. But
the debate prompt was January 6th an insurrection?
According to federal law? According to federal law? Or according to federal statutes? According to the 15th Amendment?
Tom, it is happening on federal ground. Why would you ever invoke the state definition of a thing ever?
You wouldn't. That's my point, is that you're using a colloquial definition. You're saying this is my definition of this.
The definition that I'm using, okay? And also, I don't know why you're saying colloquial. I'm appealing to the definition that lawmakers were using, which is the opposite of colloquial, that shows up
it's not
in
colloquial.
Constitution.
It's
not
colloquial.
Yeah, but I'm using it. That definition is in application to federal understandings of insurrection. Do I truly need to specify that? If I tell you, for instance, that Kyle Rittenhouse, let's say that my prompt was, I believe that Kyle Rittenhouse engaged in murder. Do you think that a valid fight against that is whether or not he would have qualified for a federal murder charge because it happened in the United States rather than just the state that it was in? It doesn't make any sense. We're talking about the venue. January 6th occurred on federal property, so we're obviously and against the United States government. So I don't need to expand my definition or speak really at all about insurrections. I might call them insurrection blues if it happens in a state. I could have a whole other definition and it wouldn't fucking matter. It's not relevant.
Correct, but somebody like Cenk Uygur would go into a debate and say, oh, well, I think Kyle Rittenhouse killed somebody because I think all you need is intent and killing somebody. And now if you have those two things, now you have murdered them. And then when you go in, you're not going to appeal to what state he killed them in and whether or not he got charged or whether or not he got convicted or any of those things. He's giving you his definition that says this is based on intent and killing them. And that's what you're basing the entire debate around, is what he gave you as the definition, not anybody else. You're saying you chose to use these other things to get the definition.
That sounds retarded.
What Stephen is telling you is implied in what he was saying, just like he's implied that this is a United States definition. You agree with that, right? That doesn't need to be clarified because there could be other countries where the definition. Yeah. So what he's telling you is
it doesn't have to be clarified because the state doesn't matter at all. The government doesn't matter at all because it's destined giving his definition.
What he's telling you is that the kind of analysis to find the correct objective definition for insurrection in a state might be different, right? Because a state might have an updated statute or provision about what insurrection is, and so maybe
also according to the law, yes, of course, but we're not talking about the law.
Wait. If Cenk were to come in with that definition of killing, right, then I would fight him on definitional grounds, but I would fight him substantively by saying why his definition is inadequate. He would say, well, I think that it was murder because all he did was kill with intent. And then my next question would be, oh, okay, well, what about in a circumstance where somebody has to kill in self-defense? Are we going to get rid of every single, affirmative defense for killing somebody because now we want to say all killing with the intention of killing somebody is murder? We're going to do that for every single thing. And I think that by demonstrating that, Cenk would either have to say, okay, well, fine, I guess I have to redefine murder in my head, or he would just go and he would say, fuck it, I don't care about any type of killing in self-defense. I would say that all of them are murder. So I think I would have adequately demonstrated the weakness there of his position of having that. Andrew was not able to demonstrate and I did that, by the way, by showing a clear example of how it would fail. And I could give a clear example. I think that murder should be defined with the mens rea of killing somebody with no justification whatsoever. You're doing this with a criminal, a devious intent, okay, to hurt or kill somebody, right? I could give an alternate definition. I could substantiate why it's better, and then I could give an example of where his definition fails. Andrew Wilson wasn't able to do any of that. He can give an absurd definition or an absurd hypothetical of pot smoking something, offer absolutely no definition of his own, seem to imply that there is no distinction between an insurrection or a riot, or that insurrections aren't even things that exist, and he's all doing this while failing to substantiate anything historically or legally. There's no comparison to be made here.
Okay, again, I am not justifying Andrew Wilson. I am saying that no, I'm not. I am not. I'm saying that
you're asking the questions that you're asking are valid.
Bro, seriously, you guys talk for like 5 minutes each time, and every time, as soon as I start talking, I get interrupted. I'm saying he is giving an argument, okay? He's giving an argument, and I'm saying it is you ought to engage with it and just to hand wave it. If you want to say based on his overall conduct, I chose not to, that makes sense. I get it. Okay, that makes sense. But I'm arguing based on like arguments in and of themselves. It makes sense to engage with consistency arguments.
Let's say that I define insurrection as only happening in federal areas. Why couldn't I just do that? And then boom. I think an insurrection only happening is the federal government. Let's go.
You could, and that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I said, is that if the definition or the argument is about like specifically like federal
okay, but when I said I don't know if it would apply to states or not, and I didn't want to go into that, he had to dive into that. He obsessed over that. Why didn't he just let it go there and then just have
a minor point? It doesn't matter.
Because when you say I don't know if it would apply to states, the only way that you can make that argument is based on state laws and not just based on whether or not
he hasn't looked into the precedent and the original.
You didn't engage with anything I just said, Pisco. I don't know why you didn't engage with anything I just said.
Engaging. You said the only way that you'd be able to say it doesn't apply to states is blah 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 blah. Cope.
If you are talking about state laws, you're not talking about state laws. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You're not talking about Pisco. Engage with what I'm saying. Engage with what I'm saying for half a second, please, motherfucker. That you are not talking about state laws. You're not talking about state laws, so it doesn't matter. Stop appealing to state laws and state laws being different.
I don't know how many
times. And to be clear, wait. To be clear, just because we're not talking about, I can look at a law to understand how somebody might define a thing without necessarily appealing to the law, right? For instance, right? For instance, I don't know if there is a legal definition of a military, right? However, when somebody says military, I'm almost exclusively thinking of a federal army. I don't know if I would call the Iowa National Guard the Iowa military. I don't know if I would use that. I'm not appealing to a law there or a particular legal or saying like it's not found in Iowa law, whatever. I just think that when we're talking military, if you say like, can the military do this? I'm almost exclusively thinking of the military for the United States of America, not a particular state.
Sure, but what you use to define a military, what you use to define a military is going to be the same for a state and for the federal government, unless it appeals to some sort of like federal law or state law.
You're a fucking idiot, Tom. That has no. You don't assume.
If you couldn't explain at any point and engage with anything I'm saying, I would believe you. But okay, so then engage with what I'm saying. Engage with what I'm saying, Pisco. Engage with what I'm saying. You can keep saying I'm an idiot.
You're not letting me. So you're not letting me, Tom. So like the kind of
You
analysis,
just finished
the language.
talking. What are you doing?
Wait, are you gonna let me talk or not? You're getting blown the fuck out because you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. So
Bro,
the kind of language. Oh, really? You're not gonna go?
Are
The
you
language
gonna?
You should let him
Oh.
go. You should let him go. Let him cook right now.
So Stephen is giving you a normative language philosophy argument implied in what he's saying. He's saying we ought to use this reference to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment for a reason. And that reason is, well, this constitutional structure binds us. It's what we're talking about. And so it makes sense to look to the Constitution for purposes of finding what the meaning of insurrection is for purposes of what we're going to be talking about with January 6th. What he's telling you, honestly, the kind of tools that you deploy in that kind of analysis, looking at the original public meaning of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, is you look in 1860s, you look at what they were saying about Section 3, you look at the legislative history, what people were talking about, what the purpose was of this, maybe the conversations, the debates that were had about Section 3. What he's telling you honestly is he didn't run that analysis for any particular state, which might have had a different conception. Now, as it happens, I agree with you, Tom, that and I agree kind of with Andrew that ultimately, the end result is the definition of insurrection should be the same, save for a couple exceptions that we can talk about. But it doesn't matter, right? And all that Stephen is doing is being honest and saying, I focused on the federal conception. I didn't focus on the state conception. You should be able to move past it because any hypothetical that you want to run regarding consistency, you can just run on a federal equivalent. And so it doesn't matter. You shouldn't be hung up on it.
Okay, I agree with all of everything you just said. I agree with all of that. The part where the initial argument that I made was that if he gives a hypothetical that includes a state, based on the definition that you came to the debate with, it would make sense that that one would engage with tests to their consistency. Yeah. That's where we went off the rails. Hold on. Wait. Just let me finish. I just let you talk forever, please. The argument is about whether or not his definition can be tested on consistency with examples like a state, not like Andrew Wilson himself, whether or not he was right in the way that he did it or whether or not one always ought to do this. But in general, if one goes to a debate to argue insurrection, it makes sense that one would challenge them on that definition and that they might use a state example and that it would still fit. It ought to fit the definition in some way.
So just to be clear, Tom, Stephen explicitly said that what his definition was, and Andrew did not contest the definition, right? Correct. At no point did Andrew say that, give a reason why, other than its broadness and scope, that you shouldn't take that definition and onboard it. And so there's, if Stephen says, well, the scope of my definition is limited to federal systems, on what grounds would Andrew have to contest that and say, debate it? If he's not willing to engage in the language philosophy arguments about...
I'm not justifying Andrew's
insurrection, or are we just fighting over a definition now?
I don't know. It's the problem is somehow Andrew has tricked people, and for some reason Tom thinks it's like a valid argument that if you when you have a debate. I'm not justifying
Andrew's argument for the 1000th time. I am not justifying his argument nor his debate. So I just want to get that clear.
The fact that you think that you're asking valid questions by saying, wouldn't it be valid when you're going into a debate to torture test the definition of one aspect of one part of the prompt? Wouldn't that be a legitimate way to conduct yourself for 3 hours? Means that you're giving far more credence to his argument than any sane human actually should. Okay? If somebody wants to come in and say that you're using a wholly incoherent definition that we can't even comport to reality, then you probably shouldn't have even accepted the debate. Or you should have said, let's change the prompt. Does Destiny have a consistent definition of insurrection? Or can insurrection even be defined adequately? Or is there even a good conceptual understanding of insurrection such that we could ever say it? These would all be valid prompts, okay? If somebody were to challenge you to a debate and they were to say, I want to have a debate on whether or not Harvey Weinstein raped or whether or not some streamer raped some person, and you spent 3 hours debating and your position was actually nobody can rape anybody unless they say, I'm going to rape you first. Nobody would say, well, actually, it's really good to debate on the definition of that's bullshit, okay? I provided a definition multiple times. He was unhappy with it, and he engaged in a lot of tomfoolery to try to say, not invoking you, just as this expression, right? He engaged in a lot of bullshit, looping arguments over and over again, saying the same dumb shit because he didn't like my definition, and then he refused to provide one for himself ever. This is not a legitimate conversation that's being done in good faith, and the idea that I should be expected to have a definition that would survive a torture test in all 50 states when we came to debate like a federal insurrection on federal grounds, it's just ridiculous.
No, I think it would.
Yes.
I just want to be clear. I think it would. I think that definition that you provide is a fine definition.
It might, but I don't know. I'm not going to overly broaden it. Yeah.
I would like to state my contention was not with the justifying anything Andrew did. It's something Destiny said that I disagree with. He said it in that debate. I'm challenging what Destiny said.
What is the thing that he said that you disagree with?
Yeah, wait, what do you disagree with exactly?
He doesn't need to engage with arguments or consistency tests that have to do with states because
let's just do this.
We're talking about January 6th. That was my contention.
Let's just do this. Okay, let's just broker around. Okay, so the debate is January 6th an insurrection? And I say I think it's an insurrection because of blah blah blah. And you go, what's the definition of insurrection? I go, I think that an insurrection. I think that for January 6th, I think it has to meet these 4 points. And then you go, what? The next part is you would say what? I give him my definition of insurrection.
And well, if you're if he's challenging your definition, well, even if he has his
Black
own
Lives
definition,
Matter.
Wait. Go ahead, Tom. Make your challenge. So
yes, let's say I have my own definition, and now I'm saying, but I think yours isn't going to apply consistently. So now I'm going to give you examples. They might be happening in states. They might be happening.
Okay,
on
and then I would
property.
say, I would say this. I would say, okay, hold on. I only came here to talk about like a federal insurrection. I'm not talking about an insurrection in a state.
I would say, is it in your definition that your definition is only federal, or
he just added it?
I could say, sure, yeah. I'll bootstrap it. Sure, I'll say, okay, sure, yeah. I'm going to say this only applies in federal circumstances. That's my definition.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I would be fine with that.
That's what he did.
Well, he did later on down the line. And the only reason that I brought up the part earlier is that I was thinking that is like the game that that Andrew was playing there. But yes, I was only challenging the idea that I ought not engage with this argument because it has to do with states and not January 6th. And we're talking
you
about
just
January
granted
6th.
That was a fine thing to do. So what he just told you is the scope of my definition only applies to states. Now you can have like an underlying argument for why that's stupid, but you'd have to provide it. You can say, well, no, your definition for insurrection should be consistent between states and federal government. But I didn't hear an argument either from you or Andrew on that point. Now, as it happens, sure. I think it is, but you need to provide an argument for why the definition of insurrection should be the same as between a federal and state.
I agree with you. Government. I also think it should, but I think personally, yes, I would just say, okay, imagine my
the
state.
definition of insurrection should be the same between both federal and state.
Bro, this is why like any politician or like any party makes fun of this, bro. This is like going in circles.
Wait, hold on, wait. To be clear, the reason why this is going in it is going in circles. The reason why this is going in circles is because conservatives are indefensible. Because conservatives have absolutely no way to defend the heinous and unbelievable shit that they've concocted on this country. So all of it will devolve into autistic hand-wringing over definitional shit like this, while they will, on the other side of their mouth, say that like Podesta and Hillary Clinton are raping children in the basement of a pizza a pizza parlor. This is the reason why all these things ground out here, right? January 6th and the insurrection on J6 is indefensible, and they know it, and it will always be autistic games like this. And for some reason, people like Tomfoolery will play defense for this side by going like, well, I think it's actually okay to ask for consistency here and blah, 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 blah. Well, that's fucking bullshit. It was obvious that Andrew was operating in bad faith for the entirety of that conversation, and the idea that I need to come with some understanding of how it would apply evenly through all states and through all time and through all dimensions or whatever is also bullshit. Again, in good faith conversation, they would have done away with it in one sentence. Okay, fine, we'll just say it only applies for federal right now. Here's my definition. Here's why I think it's better. Or you could have said, here's why you don't apply it to states. This is why I think it fails. He didn't do any of that. It was an autistic definitional torture test.
And I said earlier
that was it.
That if you said, hey, look, I did this because of the way that Andrew was engaging, but in general, I agree that like it should be able to survive consistency tests and that state examples wouldn't be all that ridiculous, then I would have been fine with that. But what I argued with was the principle that you stated that I don't have to engage with this because it's not relevant. That's what I'm.
No. Wait. Hold on. I'm saying I don't have to engage with that because the definition of an insurrection federally doesn't have to be the same as an insurrection statewide. Andrew never made that argument.
Why don't Andrew would have given me a more about the insurrection than just this definitional
Andrew isn't making that argument. I'm making the argument that
if you're making that argument, okay, and Andrew wasn't, then you can't critique me for something I said in the debate against Andrew. Andrew didn't make that argument. If Andrew would have said, well, actually, I think it's essential for these reasons why insurrection needs to be the exact same between a state and the federal government, well then, okay, well now he's pushed me a little bit, and then we can engage, I guess, in that type of conversation, and then maybe we can fight there. But he never made that argument.
Did I not say it to you? If you said, yes, yes, I was doing this just because of the dynamic with Andrew, and that if it was out in other circumstances, I wouldn't have done the same thing. Did I not say this?
Tom, that's not what's happening. What Stephen just told you is Stephen explicitly in this conversation, I know because I watched it, I listened to it. He said, my definition is only going to cover federal things. That is him signaling that even if it's not in his initial 4, he's clarified afterwards that the scope of it only covers federal related insurrections. And now Andrew has the opportunity, if he wanted to, there's nothing illegitimate about that, Tom, right? You agree that if you have a definition that only applies federal, at that point, there's nothing illegitimate for him to say, my definition only covers federal. Agreed?
Right. And I said
agreed,
in this
yes
debate
or no?
yes. And
yes,
I said
in
this.
So nothing improper has happened, right?
I disagree, and I'm saying that I think if you're going into a debate that is not specified, if it's not specified that it is about a federal law or something that ought to be federal, but instead
specified it. Did you agree that he specified a yes or no?
I agree that he specified that his is
only
only going to apply to that. And I'm saying, no, you just said a minute ago that it makes sense that somebody would challenge him on whether or not he can only apply this to a federal examples. And so I'm saying that is what I'm doing. That's literally what I'm doing. I am challenging.
Not what happened in the conversation.
I agree. I'm not justifying Andrew.
So
I don't know how many
argument?
times I have to say this. I'm making my argument.
Tom,
I'm not Andrew.
What's your argument, Tom? What's your argument? Why should the definition between insurrection as to federal versus state, why should they be the exact same?
In this debate, if it was specifically about federal law, I would agree that you would not need to engage with any other examples because, yes, now the law would change state by state. But in this debate, it is about the definition that Destiny is bringing. How he came up with that is up to him. But whether or not that can apply to other things is based on the prompt of the debate. And the debate is about what is an insurrection. And so he should be able to engage with other hypotheticals that use states. That's
Do you agree that the debate topic was actually whether January 6th was an insurrection, not what was an insurrection?
Correct. But obviously they're challenging the idea of insurrection on January 6th.
It would make sense, right, in that context. I mean, I'm not saying that I agree that it should be limited, but there's nothing wrong or incorrect or improper to have a definition of insurrection that is limited to federal things. In fact, Section 3 is one such definition. It's a insurrection against the Constitution of the United States. That's an example of a definition of insurrection that by its own terms is explicitly only as to federal things. And so you're aware, Stephen explicitly cites the Section 3 as his source for the meaning of the word insurrection. And so even if I don't agree that he should ultimately be like state versus federal. There's a big difference there. I don't think that. But just to be 100% clear.
To be 100% clear also, I didn't necessarily say there was a huge difference. I just said I'm not prepared to defend that at this time.
Yes. I think that's true. And the citation to Section 3 is one example of a definition that is purely federal. And so there's nothing incoherent about having a definition of insurrection applicable to certain places at certain times. For example, you would never question, if Stephen tried to bring in the definition of insurrection from Bangladesh or from fucking some other country, a Pacific Island country or some shit, you would be like, well, hang on. Would an insurrection be the same if it's in Bangladesh? Or we really need to stress test you, Stephen. Is this an insurrection in a failed state where there's no government?
That's quite the same, is it?
Well, no, the question is what you call it this. No, hold on, because the question is what you call it this.
Can I really quickly just give the reason why Andrew was arguing this way? Can I just, he was arguing this way because of BLM riots, right? He thinks you're offloading all of the complexity of the question of, is the BLM riots something that needs to be condemned, or should we disqualify politicians who supported it? That's what he's trying to say, right? But
yes,
he's too autistic to, when Destiny says, we're
argument.
just only applying this federally, he's too autistic to go, I want to do the BLM riots comparison. He has to argue why it shouldn't be applied.
We can do federal hypos on BLM. Don't you agree? There's tons of federal hypos. There's the White House riot outside the White House. There's federal courthouses that were attacked in BLM. There's Chaz, where I'm sure there's federal installations.
I don't know about the
wait, because there's a great example. Okay, he brought up. Listen, if he wanted to do that comparison, he could have, but even on the examples that he brought up, he failed. He brought up Chaz, and he asked me if I thought that was an insurrection against the federal government. And my question was, how did Chaz start? What happened? What were the statements made? He didn't have a single fact about Chaz. Nothing. Mm-hmm. So if he wanted to come to make that argument, he could have. However, and I think I even said it in the debate, I might have even said it earlier against tomfoolery, the only thing that argument would achieve would be convincing me, if he laid out anything that satisfied my elements, that I would say, well, Chaz was probably an insurrection then. But his assumption assumption was, for some incredibly fucking weird reason, because I'm not known as some staunch defender of BLM or fucking Chaz or lefties, he assumed that if he could have pushed me on enough examples that I would change my definition of insurrection. What, like I'm going to sit here and defend the rioting that I'm so famous for defending, that I'm going to defend Chaz that I'm such a huge fan of?
Insurrection if it fits the definition. Yeah.
That
obviously.
I what?
Yeah.
I'm saying you would just accept that it was an insurrection if it fit your definition.
100%, because that's
doesn't matter who was doing it.
Just think about because how we get definitions isn't like based on consistency or outcomes. It's the use of words. That's whether it's historical use, technical use, or public use. If you want to have a conversation about what words should mean, have that argument. That wasn't an argument that he was willing to engage in. One example of that is he said, I think it fits riot better. I think the definition that you're providing fits riot better. What's the definition of riot that he provided? Why should the definition of riot, even if it were the same with insurrection, why are they mutually exclusive? Why should we have to, like all these are normative questions about what words ought to mean, whether we should have synonyms, whether, I have a duty to define a term that I'm introducing to compare to insurrection by saying that it's overlapping. And so all of these things about what words should mean was not addressed by Andrew. And
Andrew's
correct. Wait.
I was just trying to explain the feeling behind what Tom's saying and the feeling behind what Andrew was trying to say, but they failed to actually state it correctly.
No. Hold on. No. Again, I am not justifying Andrew's arguments. I don't know why we're going back to Andrew's arguments. If you guys want to argue with Andrew, that's fine. Do that somewhere else. I was here saying I personally disagree with what it is that Destiny stated in that debate, and I personally am disagreeing with him. And then Pisco came in here and told me that I was wrong, but then he stated exactly what it is that I said, which is I agree Destiny ought to engage with stress testing the definition, and that it should be able to apply. Hold on, wait, let me finish. And then it should apply to states. And so if he's agreeing with that, that is my entire position, and that he agrees with my entire position, like the whole thing. Yes, you agreed with it.
Wait. Okay, hold on. Wait, we can. This is so simple and so quick. Okay, so very quickly, very concisely, what is it that you disagreed with in my debate on Jan 6th?
When you said that I don't need to engage with those hypotheticals because they're not federal. I'm talking about January 6th. That's a federal case.
Okay, so you don't think it was fair for me to come prepared with an insurrection definition as it applies to the U.S. government? You think that I needed to have it be consistent between all the states as well? Why?
I think generally if I'm going to go into a debate that's asking me what is an insurrection, I'm going to go in with the definition that I think is best, and that's going to be like actually fit what it is that I think an insurrection is, unless I'm arguing that it is that they ought to have been charged with this or that they could have been charged with this or anything. It's not going to be illegitimate?
Is it illegitimate? Sure. Is it illegitimate for me to believe, we're not talking about anything about charges also, I don't know why that's even being discussed, you're taking an Andrew Wilson bait there, but why is it unfair for me to personally believe that an insurrection can only happen against the federal government?
It's not, but I would want to hear that argument then.
Well, no, okay, wait. You disagreed though. You said that my argument was wrong. You said I made an incorrect statement. So then that's not true then. What you mean to say is you wish you would have heard me expand on something more? Or what if I tell you that...
Wait. I would argue with you, but I would want to know why you think that, and I would want to hear that argument. It's not wrong to have that position, but I would want to understand it, and I would probably argue.
Wait, hold on. Wait, Pisco, just let me finish this. Okay. So then let's say, initially you're not sure what my position is because I say I'm only here to argue January 6th. Okay, now I'm telling you right now I'm saying that my insurrection definition might scale down to every single state. It might, but I'm not sure because I didn't do the research on how every single state deals with an insurrection, or if insurrection has ever, in the history and tradition of the United States, been thought of as a thing that can happen against a state. That's why I don't apply my definition of insurrection to states. But if you want to have a debate on that, I could do research on that. We can come back. Is that an acceptable statement?
Okay, so we keep getting to this part, and then we don't move from here.
So this is
where
wait. Let him answer. He can answer. Go ahead. We get to this part.
Okay.
Let him answer.
So if you want to make it about state and federal, this is what I keep saying, is that I feel like it would have to apply to law in order for there to be a difference between state and federal. And in order for you to start including those differences, or in order for it to be something that changes anything, it would have to be about the law. That is the answer. That is the answer.
Okay, wait, Tom, okay. Why can't I have a difference in state and federal things that aren't found in law?
If you think that okay. if you're saying, hey, this is a federal insurrection, and I think this is so different from anything that could ever possibly happen in states that I can't engage with something that's happening in states because I think it's different in kind, then yes, I would want to know what the difference in kind is, because I would probably still disagree with that even the definition that you gave initially is still what I would call an insurrection, and that's the same definition that I would use.
What if I
would
just call those things fine? Then I would call those like state insurrections, but it's of a different character. It's a state insurrection.
Right, and I'm asking, what is the difference in kind outside of the fact that it's happening
He's
in
not
a
ready
state?
to talk about it.
I wouldn't be ready to talk about that. I would have to do research of the history of insurrection.
But I'm asking,
yes or no.
Hold on, but wait. But I'm asking, why would you think that there is a difference to where you would need to go do research on that? Because if somebody asks me, hold on, let me finish my argument.
I'm answering your question. Ignore Pisco. He's a red herring. Okay.
I know. I want to finish my argument.
The answer that I would give you is, you understand that there is a substantial difference between the federal government and state governments. Do you understand that?
Yes, and so if the law is included, I would include the governments as well, and now say that
No,
those matter too.
hold on, wait. We're not talking about the law. Okay.
Okay, you're saying what it's being committed on. The insurrection is being committed on the state government versus the federal government.
You're running way ahead. I'm just asking you. You recognize there's a difference between the United States federal government versus a state government, correct?
Yes, there's a difference. Yes.
Okay, so and there could be plenty of differences between those governments. The state of Nebraska has a single body legislature, unicameral, as opposed to every other state. I think that's bicameral legislatures, right? Or in Louisiana, I think that's the only state that still uses like a type of like a common law or something, like some weird system from like fucking France, right? That different states have different ways of doing laws. They might have different ways of organizing their governments. They might have different ways for governors appointing their officers. There might be all sorts of different things about these states, okay? Do you understand that? That's different from the federal government.
Yes.
Okay. You understand that all the states have their own state constitutions as well, right?
Yes.
Okay. If all of that is true, do you think it's fair for me to say that I don't know if you can perform an insurrection against a state meaningfully in the same way that you would against the United States federal government? I'm not sure if that's the case. I would have to do reading and research into that.
So, based on your definition that you gave, I think as long as we believe states have governmental proceedings, or they have laws, or they have government officials, that there is nothing that we could come up with. As long as we already know that much, we at least have that much information. There's nothing. There's not a reason.
Let him answer.
Pisco.
Stop. Ignore him.
There is nothing that could come up with that would actually change this in kind to where we would need something that would actually say, this is the thing that actually makes me think that I might need something more.
Okay. What if I did some research, okay? And what if I found out that in all 50 states, there was actually an explicit law that said that if you attack or threaten any public official, you can be kicked out of the state. And because of that law that exists in all 50 states, states don't actually have any statutes or any regulations relating to insurrection, because they've never needed them. Because if anybody engaged in any violent action against a state official, they're automatically kicked out of the state. What if that was a law? Would that mean that we don't really need a definition, or we don't even need the concept of insurrection in any state? Is that possible?
No, we can have the concept one way or the other. Like and this is why I keep saying that, like, if we're talking about law, then that argument matters now. If the debate is about law, then that argument matters now. But if we're not, and you're giving your concept of insurrection, that I would need a difference in kind that would change this. And if you make it about law, well, then the debate would probably need to be about the law, because that's the kind of difference that you're mentioning.
Okay, then if that's the line of argument that you want to go down, then what's wrong with me just incorporating my definition of insurrection down to all 50 states?
I'm not understanding. There wouldn't.
Let's say that I just said, okay, well, actually, the definition that I gave, the 4 elements for insurrection, I would just apply that evenly then across all 50 states.
Yeah, and then if I'm stress testing it with examples from states, then you would engage.
Okay,
with those,
then what would one example that you would think of, the hardest example that you would stress test it in a state against?
I don't know. I'm just disagreeing with the idea that you wouldn't engage with an example from a state because January 6th happened on federal property and not.
Well, hold on. The reason why I said I wouldn't engage with that idea is because I didn't do research for states. I only did research for the federal government, and because
I understand,
insurrection.
and I would need a difference in kind in order for that to make sense. And we just went down the line, and there doesn't seem to be one.
But if there's not a difference in kind, that you don't believe between a state or a federal government, then that means that there shouldn't be a difference in kind between an example that you could give of the federal government and an example you could give of the state. If there is no difference in kind between these two entities, then wouldn't every single thing necessarily carry over from a federal hypothesis to a state hypothesis if they're literally the exact same things?
So what I said was, if I was Andrew, I would have just said, okay, same example, just pretend it was federal, and it wouldn't have made a difference. But yeah, again, I wasn't defending Andrew. I was just disagreeing with the idea that what you gave as an argument for why you couldn't engage with one versus the other didn't actually make sense. That's all.
Hold on, wait. When you say that it didn't make sense, you understand that law and historical precedents and procedure, that this stuff is like pretty complicated, right? And it's a little bit arrogant of you, no offense or whatever. It would be arrogant of me to say this, right? To say that well, if this works for a federal insurrection, I know for a fact it would work in all the states, right? You understand there's like a very high level of legal arrogance there for you to just assume it's either a failure of imagination or an overestimation of legal understanding. To say well, obviously it would carry over, right?
I don't understand why we're looping on this. I've challenged this 10 times now, and you haven't challenged my challenge on this. So I'm not understanding why
your challenge is
no, let me explain.
Your challenge is that you don't see a.
Yes.
Your challenge was that you don't see a difference in kind. But that's not a challenge. That's just a failure of imagination on your end.
And a failure to understand basic civics. It's obvious that the dual systems of sovereignty that we have in this country, states are very different than the federal government. States are governments
that is not the argument.
Powers,
that is not the argument.
Governments
That's
have
not the
limited
argument.
powers. States, come on, man.
That's not the argument that I made. That's not the argument that I made. So
you said there's no difference in kind between federal government and state governments.
Oh my goodness.
Is that what you said? Yes or no?
No. That is not what I said to this argument. No, that is not what. So I haven't said anything yet. What I said is that
before, right?
if this was about the law, then including differences in federal law and state law would now matter. If the argument is not about law, then bringing up these differences to say why you can't engage with one versus the other.
Just real quick. It wasn't a difference between federal and state law. It was a difference in federal and state composition. I already told you. These are different things. The federal government is not just a copy paste of the state government, but with just different laws.
I understand, but what I said was, when it comes to your definition, the parts that we need for this definition to work, those parts are all there. We do have the officials, we do have laws, we do have proceedings, we do have the things that you would need in order for this definition to fit across the board. And so there is not a difference that we could come up with. As long as we know those things, there's not a difference that you could give me that would make it to where this would be different in kind.
Are you saying that there's examples and definitions that we could apply to make this more clear of a argument for you?
Yeah, because the thing that's confusing me is that if you're going to say that you can't see any differences in kind, then that would just mean that I would just say okay, then I agree with you, but then you don't even have to give me state hypotheticals, because any federal hypothetical should carry over 1-to-1 if there's no difference in kind, and my answer should be the exact same as it would be for the federal circumstance.
And I've already agreed with that, and I'm asking you to agree with the initial statement that you could engage with the state examples as well.
But I don't need to for a debate on a federal.
You don't need to,
this is about my debate with Andrew Wilson on January 6th. I don't need. What?
Your argument for why you can't is that it's about January 6th, and I'm saying that doesn't actually matter. That doesn't actually apply. It doesn't differentiate it in kind.
Do you agree? Wait, hold on. Do you agree that I could trap myself if I agree to an overly broad definition of insurrection, and because I'm not prepared, because I didn't do research on all 50 states for the history? That it would be stupid of me to accept that. I can't do that in a debate because I wouldn't be able to honestly answer that, right?
Well, it's possible. So do you, when you went into this debate, did you already know that there were officials in every state, that there are laws in every state, and there are proceedings in every state?
Hold on. Sorry.
It doesn't apply.
Wait, let Tom talk. Go, Tom, say your thing again. What would you say? Did I go in with what?
When you're in that debate, you already have the knowledge that there are officials in every state, there are laws in every state, and there are proceedings in every state. Those are the three things that you need that are part of. But I've never seen insurrection applied to a state. There might be a reason for that. I'm not arrogant enough to assume that just because I haven't seen a thing, it must be possible. I'm just going to apply a copy-paste. There might be a reason for that. I didn't do any state research, and January 6th wasn't about a state thing, so I didn't do any of the history or research there. It might be that I Google it and I very quickly find out, well, insurrection has actually never been seen
is a state issue because insurrection is incorporated up to the federal level, where if you're insurrecting against a state government, it's automatically counted as insurrecting against a federal thing because of like the 19th Amendment and incorporation or something. I don't know. Fuck. Well, maybe it is. So in that case, fuck me.
The whole thing that I've understood here is like, whenever we talk about like January 6th or the insurrection that happened at the federal capital, right? Like DC is a federal piece of land, right?
Yep.
That insurrection only ever happened in the District of Columbia. If it had happened in the state of Maryland or Virginia or anything, then yes, maybe a state definition would be required. But since the insurrection never left federal land, why even entertain this concept?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's such a weird torture test of a definition.
Okay, yeah, I still don't know how that applies to this. You are saying, yes, I understand that you are saying that you went and did research on historical events to come up with your definition. But I'm saying that even after doing that, your definition would still obviously apply because there is no difference in kind that would change any part of your definition. So we could say, yes, do you not know that John Smith, yes, yes, it is. So correct. So I'm saying that just let me give this example real quick, please. You're saying, you could say, did you not know that John Smith lives in Georgia and he doesn't live in the District of Columbia? How could I apply this definition when John Smith lives in that state and not this state? Okay, yes, that is a difference, but it's not a difference that would change anything about insurrections. Okay. So I don't
understand. However, you're offering, no offense, but as somebody with absolutely no legal education, you're offering me this opinion that there's no difference in kind when determining whether or not an insurrection would apply to a state. I don't know if that's true. I know you don't have the background to make that statement.
Law,
that's a statement that you're making. What?
If we're debating law, that would matter, but we're not debating law.
We're not debating law. None of this is a legal debate on whether or not somebody should have been charged for the crime. None of this has to do with, like, So when you say there's no difference in kind, that's your opinion. You're offering that opinion. I don't know if that's true. And I haven't seen a single historian, a single scholar, a single lawmaker, I haven't seen anybody else put forth that argument that there is no difference in kind between a state or federal government insofar as insurrection is concerned. If that was the case, then I would say, oh, okay, well then fine, then you're right. But that's just your opinion.
Okay, then let me, wait, hold on. This is the whole debate. Please, no, we just got here. This is the whole fucking debate. This is the whole debate. We just got here. Please, for the love of fucking God, we just got here. This is, oh my goodness. Right?
If we're talking about Tom Smith crossing like state lines, don't we already all agree that when something is crossed or that kind of situation happens, it becomes a federal case anyways? What does location or somebody's residence or state have to do with anything? They're in a federal area. They have crossed the state lines. Therefore, this whole situation becomes a federal government situation, not a state level. The state has nothing to do with it. When looking up historical records of fact regarding state law, that's just Destiny looking up how this was treated in the past in a federal sense, never how it happened at the state or the municipal sense. This is how the government is structured in the U.S. I mean, I'm fucking from outside the country, and I can already fucking get this together.
Okay, that's not relevant.
You're living in the U.S. and you give a shit. I don't know how you don't understand this.
It's just that wasn't relevant at all. Okay, Destiny, can you give me an example then of something that would be different with a proceeding or an official or a law that would change whether or not you think you would apply the definition?
No, I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Okay, so Tom, I can't imagine
you
a
accept
possibility.
That I can't think of any off the top of my head.
I can accept that to an extent, but I also can't imagine a possibility of there being something that would change the definition.
Have you gone to law school?
No.
Do you have an extensive legal background or history?
No, but I think that if you're going to dismiss an argument, I would want an argument outside of there could possibly be something that could possibly change this, and maybe aliens are engaging in government somewhere, and that would totally. Okay,
this is just retarded. Like the idea that that I have to give a definition for something that's happening on federal property that would carry through 1-to-1 in every single state, and that's like such an obvious thing. It's just. It's okay. Okay. Please can do the rest. In my opinion, I think that 99% of this, and I'm going to repeat this till the day that I die. I just think that nobody has any idea like the structure of the U.S. government or the structure of the U.S. legal system, the structure of fucking anything. To like utter a statement where it's like, well, I can't even think of a single possible difference because it seems like at least the words match on this thing, so it must be exactly the same. I have no idea, bro. I've read too much and I've studied too much of this bullshit now to be so arrogant that I would just assume, well, this would obviously carry over to 1-to-1 because I can't think of anything that would be a difference between A and B. Like I have no fucking idea. I don't actually know. I wouldn't know until I would do the research. Maybe after a day of studying, maybe like, okay, I don't believe there's a difference in kind. But the reason why I'm believing that now is because I've studied and I've read the opinions of legal scholars or historians or lawmakers at the time that have made those statements. I wouldn't just say, oh, well, fucking tomfoolery said there's no fucking difference, or fucking Destiny, the college music dropout, said there's no difference, so therefore the definition must carry through. That's fucking retarded. If somebody wants to debate that, it's all on my final point, and then you can fight with Pisco or me or whatever. The final point is, if somebody wanted to debate that in good faith, then you need to make that clear. Then the prompt of the debate should be, does Destiny's definition of insurrection apply throughout every single state, territory, military base, federal government of the United States? Not, does J6 qualify as an insurrection, but also we're going to torture test this to make sure that in Rick and Morty Universe C-136, the same definition would apply. That's fucking ridiculous, and that standard is absurd, and no sane human being would ever meet that standard in any debate ever. That's absurd.
Okay, I don't, again, yes, I don't necessarily disagree with that. But I do think that if you're going into a debate where the question is this an insurrection? We all know the part that's going to be disagreed on isn't whether or not January 6th is a date or whether or not people on January 6th went into the Capitol, but whether or not we call what it is that happened there an insurrection. And so the definition is likely what's going to be disagreed on. So hold on, I got one more thing. I just got one more thing just to close it up. I promise. And then I want to hear what you have to say. If I make the argument in that debate that there isn't a difference in kind, I would expect that it would be on you to give a difference in kind in order for why you wouldn't engage with it. That's all.
Tom, does Nigeria have processes and laws and officials? So Nigeria has processes, laws, people that live there, correct?
Yes.
Should Destiny come prepared to discuss the Nigerian definition of insurrection? Yes or no?
Not the Nigerian definition, but whether or not his definition, whether or not his definition and what happens in Nigeria, he should be able to call that an insurrection based on his definition.
I asked the question: should Destiny come prepared, yes or no, to discuss whether or not his insurrection that his definition is given applies in Nigeria?
Yes.
He should come. Okay, and he should be prepared to discuss whether or not his insurrection applies in Australia.
Yes.
And Japan.
Yes. Everywhere.
And in Star Trek universe.
Yes, everywhere.
Are you being serious?
Yes, if I say, hey, I think somebody... No, I'm not trolling. If I say somebody shot somebody, according to my definition, now you can make up any hypothetical with aliens or whatever you want. I'm still going to, as long as it fits my definition, yes, I'm still going to say they shot them.
I'm going to ask you just as an honest question, like somebody outside this.
I need somebody to give an argument against it at some point.
What part of this insurrection happened in the state of Maryland or the state of Virginia?
Wait, what?
What part of this insurrection happened in the state of Maryland or the state of Virginia specifically?
It technically happened.
Actually, some amounts did. There were people who were in Virginia, staying there, communicating within Virginia, having weapons near Virginia, Maryland. The Maryland, Virginia National Guard were
and a bunch of other states.
Or the governor, but it doesn't matter. Okay,
the insurrection that, if we're going to use the definition of this violent uprising, right? Did it happen in the state of Maryland or Virginia, or did it happen in the?
It happened in the District of Columbia,
District of Washington D.C. Okay, so then the entire definition of insurrection only applies in the Washington D.C. area, which is a federal zone, and so this whole argument is just a looping nonsense.
Okay, so fair enough. So I have a question then. Okay, so I have a question.
Why are you letting him get away from the Nigeria and Star Trek examples? This is stupid.
Hold on. No, I'm going back to that. I'm going back to that right now.
Yeah.
So I said, if somebody asks me if this person got shot and I give them a definition of shooting somebody, and then they give me an example that happened on Mars with aliens, and I say, yes, that's still shooting somebody. Why is that? Because I'm assuming you would as well. So why is that different from insurrection? What is the difference here?
So when your definition, when the citation for a term of art, which this is a term of art, insurrection is a term of art, when Stephen is signaling to you that his kind of meta, philosophy of language is grounded in history, and specifically a history connected to the Constitution, he is signaling to you the kinds of things that are going into his definition, the inputs. And that input is specifically history. That's why he's citing court cases that occurred in the 1860s. That's why he's citing specific justices that spoke about what insurrection meant. He's grounding out his definition in a particular history. That's his language philosophy as applied to insurrection. It has to do with historical use, okay?
Right. Correct.
I would agree with you if he's giving the kind of definition of shooting that is with, and the kind of definition he's using doesn't have anything to do with history and is not grounded at all in what people used to use the word as. Maybe it would be more universal. But when Stephen is signaling to you that his definition is based on historical usage because this is a term of art connected to the Constitution, that should tell you that it's relevant what the kind of denominator is the denominator the United States of America or Nigeria? Because of course, all of the evidence that Stephen is providing to justify his definition, that is justices in the United States, judges in the United States, writings in the United States, actions and events in the United States, would not apply in Nigeria. Do you agree with that, right? Yes or no?
I do. Yes, I do
yes
agree
or
that
no,
his
do you
research.
agree with that?
Yes, I agree that his
all
his
the foundation
research
of the research, if all the foundation of the research pertains to a particular denominator, and you try to segregate it from its context and bring it over into Nigeria, it might still apply, right? And maybe you could even apply. You could say, all right, use the federal definition for a state, or use the federal definition for Nigeria, and then he could try to do the best there. But what he is saying honestly is, I haven't done that historical analysis, that linguistic analysis, the use analysis as applied to states. Now, as it happens, I agree that the definition would be the same between the states, essentially the same between the states and the federal. But he's just being honest and saying, I've done the research as it relates to Section 3 and the federal definition, and so that's what I would like to talk about. Please, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's stupid to think that he should be prepared for the Nigerian insurrection case.
Well, hold on. My argument isn't that that's not my. Hold on. It's not bad faith at all. This is how debates work, and we do it all the time. If I go into a debate and I'm supposed to debate abortion,
we're discussing the United States, nothing else outside the United States.
If I go into a debate and I'm supposed to debate abortion, and we start getting into what is life, and I tell them, well, my definition for life, I got all of this from reading Aristotle, and then now they start bringing up okay, so would you call grass life? Or would you call rock life? And I'm saying, hold on.
Wait. To be clear, wait. Tom,
can I get through?
You would expect them to give a definition of life too, though, right? Like, if they were just to endlessly needle and torture your definition of life, that probably wouldn't be a good debate.
Again, I agree with your criticisms of Andrew, and I think that he should have had a position. Yes, I 100% agree.
Can I ask just a quick question?
Can I finish my example real quick? I just want
because it wasn't relevant. Listen, just a quick example.
It is relevant. It's the entire point.
It's okay. If I were to say, okay, let's say that I were to walk up to somebody, okay, let's say I were to find the president and I were to trap him in a room, okay, and I were to draw a sword and I were to throw a sword at him and I would say, we're about to fight to the death, okay, and I've practiced for this fight my whole life. Would it be fair to characterize that as an assassination?
Give it one more time.
I find the president, lock him in a room, throw him a sword, I have a sword, and I say, we're fighting to the death, okay? I know I'm going to win this fight. Would it be fair to characterize that as an assassination?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, never mind. I don't know.
Okay, so my example was.
Do you agree that January 6th was an insurrection?
Let me. Yes, 100%. 100%.
Okay,
yes, of course. Okay, so when we're, if I'm in a debate about abortion and I say, okay, well, all of my understanding about life comes from Aristotle. And then they start bringing up well, what about grass? What about rocks? Are these things life? And then I say, I'm sorry, Aristotle didn't address whether or not those things are life. I can't defend the stringency on my definition because Aristotle didn't tell me. And so even though I've given you my definition for this debate, I'm not able to engage with the stress testing of it. Do you think that would be? Hold on, wait, just let me fix it. Okay, so the whole time I've been trying to understand. So the whole time I've been trying to understand what the difference is for this and what it is for the debate that you guys are giving an example of and his research for it.
Yeah, so if someone purports to have a universal definition of a word, then you'd be right. It'd have to apply to every single context all the time.
What kind of a debate is this? Is it philosophical or legal?
It's about language. It's about the philosophy of language, really, and definitions right now. And because no one's really contesting the facts. I agree with Muda.
Yes, we're not having a legal debate.
I agreed. Yeah. So what you're saying is well, what if your definition is limited? Well, language is just an expression of human communication. Sometimes certain definitions will only apply for a given context, as Stephen just described to you. And if Stephen is explicitly saying, no, this definition only fits in this context because my justification for this definition only runs to a certain amount, right? He's justified this definition only for America under his framework of language philosophy. Just the definition of woman might be different. And you agree with this, right? You might have a different definition of women in like one place versus another, and because what is language if not usage, right? And so
yes, of course.
What Stephen is telling you is, and it's a completely direct signal, that I only have justification, right? I only have purchase. I only have this amount of dollars to buy this specific definition for this context. I don't have any more research dollars to spend on it in this other context. I think that's legitimate. If you want to say life, I can only conceive of life in the carbon life kind of mode because I just haven't done research on the other kind of things, or I haven't done it into like viruses or whatever. I don't know what the equivalent is. Then it would be fine to limit your definition to a given context so long as you're clear about it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, unless you're saying that he has to have a universal definition of insurrection that applies all the time everywhere. What you could do if you wanted to stress test him is say, well, okay, now apply this American definition, apply that definition into Nigeria. And you could, if you wanted to, apply that definition to the States or apply it to Nigeria. Nothing wrong with that. But if you're asking him directly, would an event in Nigeria be an insurrection? The next question is, under whose
according
vision
to
of
what?
insurrection?
Yes,
and it's kind of funny, just as an ultra quick aside, it's funny because I'm sorry. I think Vegan Gains was just in here earlier asking me, like, would you make hate speech laws illegal or something for like Hitler or something? And I think my response was like, in the United States, no, I don't think I would. And he was like, why does that matter if it's in the United States? Well, even when you talk about a concept like freedom of speech, well, in my mind, freedom of speech is a concept that exists within the contours outlined by the American Constitution and then the whole institutions we've developed in the United States to support said freedom of speech and all of the different freedoms that we enjoy. I don't know if I would have that same concept in a totally different country under a totally different governmental system with a totally different type of people. I'm not sure if I would. Just depends.
Yeah, I agree with that. I 100% agree with that. And so what Pisco just said is kind of what I'm getting at, is that because you said earlier, like, obviously Destiny can say, I don't want to engage with state hypotheticals, but you would have to give an argument for why he ought to. And so now that was my argument for why he ought to. And that if he says, well, my stuff is just limited, I would probably just say, okay, so then or even Pisco, just a second ago, you said, well, according to what definition? According to what? Yeah. And I would say, according to your definition that you already brought up. So even though this example exists in a state, I'm still asking it according to your definition.
Yes, Tom, that would have been an easy way. That's a good point. If Andrew wanted to, he could have said either he could have changed the hypothetical to be a federal. We all agree on that. Or he could have said, well, I know your definition only applies to federal things, but I'd like you to apply it to a state thing. I understand that you don't have this, but can we examine this, the state context using the federal definition, understanding that it might have a different answer, but I just want to see how it interacts with this situation, and I want to use the facts from the situation and try to incorporate your definition. I think that would be legitimate too. But ultimately, this is like such a dumb point to get hung up on and to even have this long of a conversation about, because it would be so easy to sidestep it and to come up with some example that might test Stephen, right? And just use it.
Wait, use I agree with this, but again, I was not defending Andrew. I'm making my argument, and I did do that. And then you came in and said that it was stupid. And so when you're asking, hey, well, should Destiny be prepared to engage with Nigerian examples? Well, I say yes, but the question would be, according to what? Well, according to his definition, it doesn't matter where it's happening. It could happen on Mars. According to his definition, he can still apply that definition to it.
Tom, if that was your point, I'm okay with that point. If your point
is that is
he should be able to apply that to a fact pattern, but it sounded like what you're saying is he needs to come ready to discuss.
No, not different, like context and everything. No, definitely not.
But understand the limit. The kind of it's not the best. You're not gonna get the best kind of conclusion out of that. So he might say, yeah, under the federal definition, that would be an insurrection in Nigeria, but that's not what applies there, and so. I'm not going to call it an insurrection because that would be kind of inapposite, or it would be anachronistic, or for whatever reason improper for me to call them actually an insurrection. And so I don't want to do that right now. Under the federal definition, they would, but under whatever standard they have, it might be different. And so just understand the limitation there. So that's all fine. But I understood you to be saying like he needs to be ready to discuss all the different standards, and he needs to have one universal standard that applies in every place all the time.
No, I specifically said it just according to his definition. He already has his definition, and his definition can apply no matter what. And that's why I gave the example. I'm going to give a definition of shooting. It doesn't matter if it's happening on Mars. My definition can still apply because they're asking me according to my definition.
Okay. Yeah, but hold on, wait. But shooting is not the same type of thing as an insurrection, right?
Right, but it depends on what context we're giving. It depends, because if we're talking about law, then it's going to be a very different thing. If we're talking about like killing somebody versus murdering somebody versus like, yes, these are all going to be different things. But once I give my definition and you give an example and say, according to your definition, does this example fit it? I should be able to answer any example as long as.
Well, but hold on, no, wait, stop. You understand, okay, that when we use words and when we say language, you understand that the language that we use implies...
That isn't what happened here. I don't know why...
I know, this is so fucking retarded, I understand, which is why I don't like that. If Tom wanted to just talk about this particular thing, he could do it, but couching it in this debate makes it so unbelievably stupid, okay?
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to confuse you with that part.
Wait, hold on. I'm just saying that...
I just want to say good night. You have a good rest of the night, everyone. Take care.
I love you. Wait, come back tomorrow, okay? And I want to chat with you. I love you, okay?
I love you, buddy.
Okay.
Take care.
What I'm saying is that, like, shooting, okay? Shooting is a different kind of thing than an insurrection, okay? And that shooting is a much more simple relationship between two things, right?
Yeah,
we can define shooting in a way that almost universally applies to almost every single particular thing. Almost, right?
Correct.
However, even for shooting, we might be able to imagine some things that don't count as shooting, right? For instance, let's say that I have a gun and I pull the trigger and I'm in outer space and the bullet has a greater mass than I do. When I pull that trigger and I shoot, right, I'm the one that goes back and the bullet actually stays still from the perspective of the bullet, at least, although taking from that, right? Would you consider that shooting if the bullet isn't moving because it's so huge that I'm the one that goes back? Does that kind of shooting the bullet?
Yeah, I don't know. That would be much harder.
Okay, yeah. So all I'm saying is that, like, when we say things, when you say shooting, we're assuming that the bullet is probably smaller than the person. Obviously, we're assuming that it's happening on planet Earth, and we have normal, ordinary gravity, and rules of physics are applying. Right? There's a whole bunch of things that are applying there. Okay. There's a whole bunch of things that make it so that, like, but generally I agree with you that shooting applies across almost every frame of reference we can imagine on Earth, like, pretty easily, okay? Insurrection refers to a relationship between a group of people. It generally implies some form of government. It generally implies some type of, like, legal structure. It implies some form of, like, coordinated communication that's like, there's so much that's implied in insurrection that when you say I can't imagine difference in kind, because of all the relational stuff going on here, it's hard to imagine if I would just easily copy paste that. It's possible that it would work, but I would be uncomfortable without doing research. Much the same that the example that I gave earlier about if I were to walk up to a president to challenge to a fight to the death, knowing that I'm going to win, and I think most people would, I don't know why you said no, but most people say, yeah, you're basically an assassination, right? Well, what if when somebody goes up to Khal Drogo and says, I want to fight, okay? And in their culture, the customs are, well, the strongest person can challenge anybody to a fight or kill them at any time, and when they kill them, now they become the leader. Well, we probably wouldn't call that an assassination, right? It's a far different character because of the relationship between people that challenge the leader for power. Much the same that the way that you protest or engage in, like, violent behavior against a federal government might be different than how you engage in it against a state government. I just don't know because I haven't done that research. It's possible that it would be the exact same, but if I haven't done the research, I'm not confident enough to stake that out in the middle of the debate when that's not even material to the conversation because it was about a insurrection on against a federal entity.
Yeah, sure. So I possibly may have like confused this by couching it in this debate, but in this debate is where you made the statement, and so that's just what I'm challenging is what you said there, and I'm challenging the statement. And I feel like I did say a ton of times,
okay, sure.
Only applying this to the argument that you already gave and the definition you already gave.
Sure, I got it. Here's my issue, okay? And then here's what I'm going to say, and I'm going to tell you exactly what would have happened. It might still happen, and you're going to deny both, but I know it would have happened 1 billion%. This is my issue, is you would have come in, and you would have asked me that, and if I would have engaged, this is why I, for instance, refuse to condemn anything in front of fucking conservatives, okay? If you would have come in and asked me that, and I would have engaged with you in a vacuum in good faith, and I would have said, oh, okay, Tom, would my definition of insurrection apply down to states? Yeah, I'd say actually probably, almost for sure, yeah, it probably would, yeah. Then what happens is you leave here, and then you go talk to Andrew Wilson about the debate, and Andrew Wilson goes, huh, interesting. So Destiny conceded that point immediately to you. However, here are some examples where I don't actually think it would fit at all. And he might have even researched some that would completely obliterate the fact that I would incorporate the federal insurrection of the state insurrection. Well, now I've lost a debate by proxy because you've come in asking a question that was contextually brought up in another debate, and then you've gotten an answer from me that now Andrew Wilson is going to harp on as a reason why he won a particular debate because I wasn't willing to make the same concession to him. That's why when you ask me the context of the other debate, it doesn't work. Yeah.
Wait,
yeah,
Tom,
fair enough. That makes sense.
Tom, I want to give you an example of this specific thing, specifically with Andrew, specifically with the definition of insurrection when I had a conversation with him. So he brings up the question of, well, what if American Indians, what if they did the kind of constitutive acts that would constitute an insurrection, but it was American Indians as opposed to citizens? Yeah. And I said, I don't think that American Indians at the time of the 14th Amendment were considered American citizens, and I think in order to be an insurrection, it's different than like treason and an invasion. And so I think that American Indians doing the same kind of thing, unless they're kind of in coordination with American citizens, I don't think that that would be an insurrection. And he says, well, actually, Pisco, in the the Insurrection Act specifically calls out American Indians. I was like, oh, and in the moment I was like, oh, well, I guess then if that's what it says, then I was wrong about that, and American Indians could do an insurrection. And in that moment, I didn't have the specific knowledge to talk about American Indians and the relationship in terms of insurrection versus invasion. Because remember, there's a difference between invasion and insurrection in terms of who's doing the thing. And I did not have the history on American Indians. So I take the time, I go back and I'm licking my wounds. I'm like, ugh, I'm glad that this happened because like now I can do the research. I'm glad because I think it shows the wiseness of a methodologically, like historically grounded approach because I can be proved wrong or proved right on something. And I'm just going to lick my wounds and like actually look into it. Well, as it turns out, I looked into it. And the first calling forth acts, the insurrection acts, all refer to invasions of American Indians. They call out American Indians as invaders, not as insurrection people. And so when I looked into it, even though the American Indians are listed in the Insurrection Act, they were listed in the Insurrection Act as pertains to invaders. And that would go to indicate that, maybe historically these American Indians weren't capable, supposing they weren't citizens, of insurrection. And that shows you the pitfalls of just assuming. In that moment, I took Andrew at good faith that like, oh, these people are listed in the Insurrection Act, therefore insurrection must apply to them. But when I dug a little deeper, I'm like, oh no, they're listed there, but they are put in the same category as foreign invaders, and so it's actually a little different. It's more complicated, and now I need to look to like specific case law and maybe invocations of how American Indians were invoked vis-a-vis insurrection, and so you can understand how this gets very complicated out of hand. To say nothing about how it might be complicated with the states. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Yeah, so I think that makes sense. These are complicated issues, and especially if Stephen is signaling that his approach is grounded in history, that is right away an indication that the kind of things that you're going to need to disprove his definition on its own terms, or to try to bring in some other complicated factors, it will require him to re-examine the different factors that he's using, to the extent that you want him to faithfully apply those principles in the context. Now, you could ask him to try to map on his already said definition to this context, but you might have like problems, like he just explained to you with the Khal Drogo example, or how I just explained with the American Indian, where I can apply it, but it isn't actually accurate in terms of what it would be called. And so that's the only thing I would say, is that you have to be careful when you're assuming that things will apply between contexts. But in this case, thankfully, I think it does.
Okay, yeah, I agree. I just real quick, it's not important, but I would have sworn if the person throws, I thought that's why you said it. They throw the other person a sword and then they want to fight them. I would assume now they're able to defend themselves, and this is like a little bit different than an assassination, but I suppose it would kind of fit.
If I would have trapped you in a room and I would have thrown you a knife and I would have say we're going to fight, it would be murder.
Knife guy.
Yeah, sure. It's just I thought that's why you threw that in, is to make sure it's not. Yeah, it's not. I guess it does like fit the definition. It's just, I thought that's why you added the part that you're giving him a sword instead of just trapping him in a room and killing him. But
so yeah, if you threw like a 15th century flintlock pistol at Nancy Pelosi while she's sleeping and undergoing cancer treatment, and you walk in with an AR-15 and you say, defend yourself, do you think that would be an assassination?
Yeah, probably. That's what I'm saying, is that like these obviously fit the definitions. It's just I thought he was purposely trying to make it not an assassination by giving him a sword, and so that's the only reason I answered that way. Yeah, I didn't mean to like avoid your example with that.
I'm sorry, I got triggered at this topic, so to the extent that I was rude to you.
It's all good. Yeah, well, that's why I was getting frustrated, is because I felt like everybody was kind of arguing against something I wasn't saying, and I was kind of getting annoyed too. So my bad.
I mean, I was clear. I think that Destin clearly won the debate, but I do think that was his weakest point. Of course. Because the examples that he was looking at, a lot of them were state, and it does apply. But he was focused on the federal, so I'll give him that. And I don't think it mattered.
Which ones were state?
So the examples like of some of the insurrections that you looked at,
wait,
let me think. Nat Turner's rebellion, I think, was state. And I
that was the slave guy, right? Didn't they just like kill like civilians and shit? Wasn't that just kind of like
Let's look at this one. Let's look at this. Let's look.
You're just targeting civilians. That goes down to domestic terrorism, right?
Yeah, I don't think that I don't even know if that would qualify as a rebellion or an insurrection. I think they were literally just killing slave owners and shit as they went down. That's my recollection, but I could be wrong.
It's something that you cite, or it's cited in your paper at the very least as an insurrection, and so you got to be careful because you can't count out history if you just don't like it, right? If your whole thing is grounded in history and what it was considered.
Sure, we can go back and look.
So the local militias, I'm assuming, might have been related to state militias, right? And so that could be state, potentially, right? State militias are state. So if you're attacking the militia, that would be kind of a state thing. But again, it's a minor point, and overall, the defects in Andrew's whole approach were so apparent for everyone to see. I encourage people who care about this to look at my post, because it really is every aspect of what he was doing. I think the worst thing that he did, number one, was citing to the courts, not knowing that SCOTUS actually has upheld a disqualification for January 6th related to insurrection. Now, you don't know about that because it's not Trump, but it was a state official. The court said that, Congress has to enact legislation for federal officials, but it allowed and upheld a state disqualification for January 6th as an insurrection. And
also, just as a quick thing, I don't believe that in that paper, I don't think Nat Turner's revolt was ever mentioned as an insurrection. I don't think that.
Maybe it was another.
It was Shays' Rebellion, the Whiskey Insurrection, the Burr Insurrection, and John Brown's raid.
Okay.
But okay.
I'll look into it. The other thing that's really
wait, Pisco. I have a really important question for you. What do you think of the idea of directly threatening versus threatening by proxy? So the idea that you have to be directly threatening the lawmakers. So I think one thing that kind of separates January 6th from a lot of the other examples people use, and the abortion clinic example that Andrew used, is that on January 6th, they're directly threatening the lawmakers. Do you think that is a requirement? Do you think that should be a requirement? That you're directly applying pressure?
To me, all that matters is your intent. So we intimidation, right? Someone can be subjectively intimidated, but when we say you intimidated someone, legally, this is my belief, you need to have intended it, right? And so if people come into a particular place without the intention of putting people in fear of bodily injury, then I do not think it is accurate to say that they are intimidating. Now, I understand colloquially we'd say it's intimidating, but you have to be able to prove the intention, right? All of this requires intentionality, a volitional act. So just coming in numbers by itself is not enough, right? You need to intend to intimidate. That's what intimidation is under the law in terms of finding you guilty of something. If you send a bunch of letters by proxy, a big letter campaign, I believe, and with the intention to intimidate people, and you just have a bunch of people, right? More than one. Maybe there's some question because an insurrection needs to be out in the open. And so maybe it wouldn't be an insurrection, but yeah.
Can I ask you a quick question on that? Because this is something I said. I don't know if you agree with me. If the exact same events had happened on January 5th or January 7th, would you agree with me that you probably wouldn't call it an insurrection at that point?
I would still probably call it an insurrection if it was done for the same purpose. Remember that. But if
they're not there because they're not there now to stop the certification of the vote.
So that's the problem, right, Stephen? So the question is, what was the purpose? That's always going to be the key question. You're correct.
So what if they did it on March 5th with the same purpose?
Right, I'm about to say it, right? If they did it on a different day, it's much weaker evidence that they had that purpose, right? So that's just a question of the weight of the evidence. And so, but there's nothing impossible if it happened on January 5th. But
sure, if they go on January 5th with the intention to burn down the Congress building so they can't certify vote. Sure,
So it all has to do with the purpose. And you might have easy cases where the purpose is obvious, like it was on January 6th, and hard cases. But that doesn't defeat the principle, right? And you could have a disagreement about what a public purpose even is, right? Is stealing a bunch of things to give to the rich, give to the poor, but also to steal some for yourself, a mixed motive kind of case, right? Is that a public purpose? Oh, maybe that's a hard one. But there are clear cases, obvious cases. The sports riot example is a clear case where there's nobody would say that being angry that your sports team lost and blowing up your town because you're out of anger is a public purpose. No reasonable person would think that. And Andrew was not able to contend with the hypothetical. And Stephen was correct. If you're able to show even one case where riot does not overlap insurrection, then you agree by definition that they're not the same definition, right? And there's a lot of different cases you can come up with. If you had a riot based on a bunch of people who injected venom from Batman or like a bunch of drugs and they're coked out of their heads and they're just starting to riot, that would not be for a public purpose. And by the way, even if it were true that riot overlapped completely with insurrection, that doesn't disprove the definition of insurrection, okay? We have such things as synonyms in this world, okay? And so just showing that it's perfectly overlaps wouldn't change anything. And plus,
well, I would disagree with that. If it perfectly overlaps, that would make every riot an insurrection. Right?
But hang on a second. So you agree that synonyms, if riot is a synonym for insurrection, then that's just what the words mean, right? With the meaning of the words or the usage of the words.
Yeah, but I clearly wouldn't want to call every single riot an insurrection.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying that if it were true that they perfectly, I don't believe they at all perfectly overlap. But if it were true, it wouldn't disprove that insurrection means this. I'm just letting you know.
As a matter of pure logics, you're correct. But I mean, it would obviously be incredibly unsatisfying.
I'm gonna give you more. Okay. Right. So in order to say this argument or this definition sucks because it perfectly overlaps with riot, or riot better fits insurrection, you need to provide a definition of riot. You understand that, right? You can't say insurrection better fits riot and just leave it there. It better fits riot because why? Well, because riot means what? Right? You need to have an independently justified definition of riot. Otherwise, you're just talking in circles. The only definition he gave of riot was your definition of insurrection. But how can he say that your definition of insurrection better fits riot if his definition of riot is,
yeah, at that point I would
circular.
say, okay, you can say that true. Okay, fine. If it's the same definition, then you can say that they're the same, but we're going to call it insurrection for the sake of this debate. And let's move forward now. You've agreed with me.
The argument, it better fits riot. What does that mean? Like, right? Like, what does it mean it better fits riot?
Like, I think, honestly, the guy that came in on the call who did the rape sexual assault thing in the end, that was like the best example. That, let's say you were debating somebody over whether or not something was a rape and they didn't have a definition for rape, but they did have a definition for sexual assault. Well, basically every single thing that you say about rape is going to apply to sexual assault. So the person should say, well, I don't think that rape is a real thing. I would just use sexual assault to explain this. It literally incorporates all of this. Like, it's the other way around, because every rape is a sexual assault, but not every sexual assault is a rape. And so in this case, every insurrection has rioting as part of it. Wait. Careful, because he would just say that it would. Actually, I don't even know if that's true.
No, Stephen, it doesn't even make sense.
That is
if you were to say, how can you say every riot would be an insurrection if you don't know what riot means?
No, that's why I'm saying it's the other way around. Every insurrection has riot as part of it, just as every rape has a sexual assault as part of it.
So let's take what you just said, Tom. Right? Every insurrection has a riot part of it. Imagine that Andrew were to say that. Doesn't he need to provide a definition of what a riot is?
Yes, now he's going to give a definition of riot that excludes some aspects of, well, just not just a definition, but a definition that excludes aspects of insurrection according to Destiny's definition. And so he gave his definition of riot was the same as his insurrection.
Sorry. So he is saying, Stephen, your definition of insurrection better fits the term riot. And the answer is why? Why does it better fit the term riot? You could give an answer for this, right?
Well, no, you can. That's what I'm saying. Is you would have to give a definition of riot that has that meets the standards, but it's missing aspects of what Destiny's calling an insurrection.
You're not understanding. Sorry, Tom. So this is what I'm trying to say. Okay, if you say that the elements that you're using, Stephen, better fit riot, a cogent response would be like, because back in the day, or currently, or technically, people considered riots to have those elements. For example,
in that case, you would have to give a definition of insurrection, because now he's saying it doesn't fit insurrection as much as riot. He would have to give. No, hold on. Just let me finish this. He would have to give a definition of both riot and insurrection. He would, because now he's saying it better fits this.
You're not following, Tom. His critique, right, is that Stephen's definition of insurrection better maps onto the term riot.
Correct.
He doesn't give a rationale. Why does the term insurrection better fit riot? And the only thing you could say is, well, though that definition is more in keeping with the usage of the term riot, right? Like, he would have to give the same kind of evidence that Stephen's providing. Well, because look, here's a case where those elements were used to define riot here. These elements, were present in all these riots, and they were all considered riots. And so what the argument that was missing from Andrew is the because. well, the definition of that Stephen provides for insurrection better fits riot because look at all these riots and they've all had this fit, and look at all these insurrections that didn't have that fit. But of course, he wasn't engaging with Stephen's historical examples, so he couldn't make the case that the definition that Stephen provided wasn't fitting those examples and weren't therefore fitting the usage. And he didn't provide a definition of riot or cases of riots from where you could determine the usage of it. And so all of it is a humongous problem of failing to demonstrate why the definition that Stephen provides better fits the term riot. He wasn't able to demonstrate that.
True. Just to be clear, the second part of what you just said is what I was saying, is that yes, he would have to also engage with Destiny's definition to where he would have a definition of not just riot, but also he has to engage with a definition of insurrection to separate them in some way.
He needs to engage with Stephen's historical examples, right?
Correct.
He needs, so when he says to Stephen, for example, no one would consider this hippie example an insurrection, he's opening the door to say, oh, really? Would you consider Whiskey Rebellion an insurrection? But Andrew wasn't answering those questions.
Right.
Once you say your definition is too broad, it's perfectly valid. You've opened the door for Stephen saying it's the appropriate broadness. It's the appropriate broadness because anything less broad would be too narrow. It would not capture in this historical usage. But he would not answer those cases and those histories and say, well, do you think this is an insurrection? Do you agree that any definition we provide has to include this case? He was only willing to make the argument on broadness. And that, of course, leaves Stephen very little room to really justify why it needs to be that broad. Because if you're not going to engage in the historical examples, basically the reason the definition is as broad as it is, and I don't think it's too broad, I think it's appropriately broad, is because everyone agrees that situations where very few people die can be an insurrection. Everyone agrees one of the most historically understood examples is the Whiskey Rebellion. During that, it wasn't the transfer of power. It wasn't to overthrow the government. And the definition, essentially, it was to the actions there were to stop the collection of taxes. And so he didn't want to deal with those hypotheticals because then he has to say, no, the Whiskey Rebellion wasn't an insurrection. I know better than the people at the time. Or, the attack on Fort Sumter by itself wasn't an insurrection. Or the Shays Rebellion wasn't an insurrection. He didn't want to have to say that. What he eventually, and he'll never agree to this debate, and Rob Noor won't either, because their definition is something like insurrection is having a good chance, a violent attempt with a good chance to overthrow the government. But under that, and that's literally what I just said is the literal definition that Rob Noor provided in a recent stream, right? The insurrection is a violent attempt with a good chance to overthrow the government. Under that definition, right, that he provided, which is so narrow, the Civil War wouldn't even be an insurrection. And so any definition they provide is going to suffer from those problems, and that's why they don't provide one, or they don't want to interrogate it. Anyway, that's my spiel.
All right, y'all got anything else for me?
Nope, it's always fun to scream at people, though.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Y'all have a good night.
Wait, are you talking to Andrew tonight?
No, I was supposed to, but it went late, and now he's got to get on a flight, so I'll probably talk to him either tomorrow or the day after.
Okay. Well, good luck.
All right. Bye. You trigger him by using another debate/context. I said at the beginning of this, we had already gone through other things, right? So it doesn't, I don't accept that. I don't accept that. That's fucking bullshit, actually. I accepted it from him, but I don't actually in reality. I'm going to be honest. Because already at the very first conversation that we had, we were talking about whether or not, what was it? We were talking about whether, stress testing the definition already. And I was giving a bunch of examples, and I was saying, so what about this? Like, would this fit? And he's like, no, that doesn't matter because Andrew, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, bro, I don't give a fuck about Andrew. Stop bringing Andrew up. I'm asking you about, engaging with, I'm trying to understand your conceptual understanding of what an insurrection is and what you think would fit. I'm personally asking you, not Andrew. So I don't, stop going back to that. Okay. All right. So we got an abortion clinic. Somebody goes in. No, Andrew, no, because he didn't even give his own definition. I'm like, I don't give a fuck about Andrew. Stop. I don't know. And so finally he was like, okay, I got you. Okay. All right. So let's do this. Okay. Sorry. All right. Give your own example. And just let's go back to this. And so I was like, all right. And then we went through a bunch of examples, and he was able to engage with all of them because he knew that I'm not defending Andrew. He understood. He knew I'm not here to defend Andrew, and I'm asking my own questions based on what happened in the debate with Andrew, based on what he said in the debate with Andrew. But I'm not Andrew. I'm not defending Andrew. I'm not here, like, this has nothing to do with Andrew outside of the fact that what you said in the debate with Andrew was with Andrew. That's it. That's the only part that applies. And so we had already covered that. He already understood it. He already got it. We went through a bunch of examples, and he understood. I'm not defending Andrew. Then we got into this other part, and still somehow kept going back to Andrew. And in a bunch of other times that I've gone on, he's done the same thing. But normally, I just let him do it after a while because I don't feel like getting into a big fight with him. And I'm not super, I know that no matter what, I'm going to get painted as like defending Anavar one time, defending Red Pillars another time, defending, like each time I'm supposedly defending some like crazy idea that I don't actually associate with or identify with in any way. And so, stop saying you can explain. I told you, you can jump on if you want to come explain. I don't know what you're doing. You're not in the waiting room. You're not here. You want to come explain. Let's go.